Chapter 1, The GEWF. The void was a strange place. It wasn't cold, nor warm. It wasn't dark, nor was it light. It was nothing, and yet everything all at once. Michael Caine floated in it, an ephemeral sensation of weightlessness and confusion coursing through him. It took him a moment to orient his thoughts, to gather himself in the swirling nothingness that seemed to stretch in every direction. "Whoa," he muttered aloud, though the sound seemed to echo inside his own head rather than carry through the void. "I'm floating. That was such a sick move. I could totally fly now. Wait. Am I in space?" The thought struck him like a steel chair to the back of the head, disjointed and raw. Memories surged, fragmented but vivid. The garage, the ladder, the spotlight in his mind's eye illuminating his grand stage. He'd been in the middle of pulling off the most mind-blowing finishing move the world had never seen, a twist on a classic, one that would have cemented him as a legend in backyard wrestling lore. It was his ladder death match special, as he dubbed it. But as he floated in the vastness of the void, those memories felt distant, as if they belonged to someone else. Stars and galaxies stretched endlessly in every direction, a cosmic sea of light and motion. He felt both infinitesimally small and bizarrely infinite, like a speck of dust caught in an eternal dance of creation. Nebulae pulsed with colors so vivid they seemed alive, tendrils of light weaving and unwinding like wrestlers locking up in an endless grapple. Comets streaked past, their icy tails leaving ghostly trails that faded into nothingness. He could feel the immense power of supernovas on the edge of his perception, like the distant roar of a crowd cheering for a titanic battle. The sensation of floating was unlike anything Michael had ever experienced. It wasn't weightlessness in the way he'd imagined astronauts felt. It was something deeper, as though his very essence had been unmoored. His body, if he even had one anymore, seemed to drift without resistance, and yet he felt connected to everything around him, tethered by invisible strings of energy and light. Is this what it's like to ascend? He wondered aloud, his voice swallowed by the shimmering expanse. Man, this beats any cage match I've ever seen. And then, nothing. Oh, crap, Michael said, the realization dawning on him like a bell ringing to start a match. I totally died. Damn it. That move was sick, though. Absolutely original. The crowd, well, my buddy Greg and the neighbor's dog, would have gone wild. If I'd lived long enough to use it on someone. The void offered no response, no rebuttal to his musings. It just was, and he was in it, floating endlessly. The vast, empty expanse around him shimmered with faint glimmers of starlight, each one distant yet achingly close. He felt as though he could reach out, if he had hands, and pluck a galaxy from the void, its spirals spinning lazily between his non-existent fingers. The star seemed to whisper secrets in a language he didn't understand, their light pulsing in rhythms that matched the faint beating of something deep within him. But something was happening. Slowly, subtly, he felt a pull, as if unseen hands were tugging at his very essence. At first, it was a gentle tug, like a current drawing him toward an unseen shore. Then it grew insistent, an overwhelming force that gripped him with the intensity of a submission hold, wrenching him forward. The cosmos blurred and twisted around him, stars streaking into long trails of light that danced and tangled like the ropes of a wrestling ring. Galaxies whirled past, their colors bleeding together in a cacophony of blues, purples, and golds, until the void itself seemed to collapse inward, dragging him through. It wasn't just movement, it was a sensation of being unwound and restitched, his very essence spiraling through time and space. He felt his consciousness stretch thin, a scream forming at the edges of his mind as the pressure built, only to be silenced by the deafening roar of reality reassembling itself. For one heart-stopping moment, he existed everywhere and nowhere, a fragment of a thought in the grand tapestry of existence. And then, with a shunt like being slammed into the mat from a suplex, it all stopped. The pull released him, and he was whole again, tumbling into a new reality. Wait, what's happening? Michael's voice quavered, his bravado faltering as the void seemed to shift and churn around him. Scenes flashed before his eyes. No, not his eyes. His consciousness? Memory? Whatever part of him remained. Wrestling arenas unlike anything he'd ever dreamed of unfolded before him on the holographic screen. Glowing platforms suspended in midair shimmered like constellations, their surfaces rippling with energy fields that responded to each footstep and impact. Warriors with shimmering, iridescent skin and cybernetic limbs clashed under a kaleidoscope of alien lights that shifted in time with the rhythmic chants of the crowd. The roar of countless voices in unison, a sound both guttural and melodic, reverberated through the room, sending a thrill through Mikhail's wiry frame. The announcer's voice boomed, his tone a blend of gravitas and exhilaration. Ladies and gentle beings of the galaxy. Witness the ferocity of Tharok the Pulverizer, a champion forged in the blood pits of Drayax Prime, versus Clethara, the Winged Venom, mistress of aerial domination from the Ether clans. Tonight, only one will walk away from this sacred battlefield alive. Mikhail's four eyes widened as the camera zoomed in on the combatants. Tharok, a hulking brute with a metallic exoskeleton, flexed his cybernetic arms, each movement releasing a hiss of steam as glowing red conduits pulsed across his frame. His opponent, Clethara, floated effortlessly above the arena, her translucent wings glinting like razor-sharp blades as she circled him. The match began with an explosive clash. Tharok lunged forward, his massive fist striking the platform with a thunderous crack as Clethara darted away, her movements a blur of speed and precision. She retaliated with a flurry of venomous spines launched from her tail, each one sizzling as it struck Tharok's armor. He roared, his visor flashing a menacing crimson, and retaliated by launching a devastating shockwave that sent energy rippling across the platform, knocking Clethara out of the air. Mikhail leaned closer to the screen, his reflection briefly visible in the glossy surface. For a moment, he caught sight of his new face, blue-skinned, wiry, with those striking four eyes that seemed to glimmer with the same fire as the combatants on the screen. It was an alien visage, but there was something unmistakably familiar in the determination etched across it. He wasn't just watching this spectacle, he was imagining himself in that arena, imagining his own name being chanted by billions of beings across the galaxy. Clethara recovered mid-fall, her wings snapping open as she spiraled upward, delivering a vicious counterattack that caught Tharok off guard. She slashed at his exposed joints, her strikes precise and deadly, drawing sparks and shards of metal. But Tharok wasn't finished. With a guttural roar, he tore a section of the platform loose and hurled it at her, the massive projectile careening through the air like a meteor. The crowd erupted in a deafening roar as the match descended into chaos, each move more brutal and awe-inspiring than the last. It was raw, visceral, and utterly thrilling. And in that moment, Mikhail knew with absolute certainty, he belonged in that arena. And then looking down he saw it, himself, or rather, a version of himself. Small, wiry, with striking blue-green skin that seemed to shimmer and shift in tone, at times almost lime-green under the faint light. His frame, though youthful, carried a surprising fitness, his muscles lean and taut like a coiled spring. He flexed his forearms instinctively, their movement fluid and natural, as if he'd been born with them. Marveling at how alien yet inherently right it all felt. He was no longer Michael Caine. He was something new. Someone new. Mikhail X'Cen, a voice called, distant yet familiar, cutting through the swirling chaos like the crack of a ring bell. Mikhail, get in here. Stop watching GEWF and come eat your strobians before they get cold. Wait, strobians? Mikhail, repeated, his voice higher pitched and tinged with an accent he hadn't possessed before. He blinked, all four eyes, and the void dissolved. Suddenly, he was in a small, dimly lit room with walls made of a smooth, metallic material that seemed to hum faintly. The air smelled faintly of something earthy and sweet, with a sharp undertone he couldn't quite place. A woman, or at least, what he assumed was a woman, stood in the doorway. She was taller than him by at least a foot, her skin a deeper shade of blue, with elaborate markings etched into it like tattoos that shimmered faintly in the light. Her four eyes glinted with impatience and affection as she crossed her arms over her chest. Mikhail, she said again, her tone equal parts scolding and amused. Don't make me come over there. Ah. Right, coming, Mikhail said, his voice barely more than a squeak. His mind raced as he stumbled forward, his movements awkward and uncoordinated. His body felt wrong. Too light, too flexible. He glanced down at his hands, thin and wiry, with an extra joint in each finger, and nearly tripped over his own feet. This is new, he muttered under his breath, his heart pounding as he followed the woman, his mother? Was she his mom now? How did this work? Memories that weren't his crowded his mind, intertwining with his own. He knew her name, her voice, her smile. She was familiar and alien all at once. The next room was a small, cozy space dominated by a circular table laden with dishes of food that looked as strange as everything else in this new world. A pile of wriggling, insect-like creatures sat on a platter in the center, their glossy shells catching the light. Mikhail's stomach churned at the sight. Fresh strobians, his mom said, gesturing proudly. Caught them just for you. Eat up, Mikhail. You'll need your strength if you're going to keep watching those GEWF matches all night. Mikhail blinked, his four eyes struggling to focus on the wriggling mass before him. The room spun slightly as he tried to reconcile what was happening. The creatures weren't just bugs, they were small, worm-like beings with segmented bodies that gleamed like polished metal, each about the size of a finger. Their tiny, glistening eyes and twitching antennae made them look uncomfortably sentient. He stared at them, his memories tugging at the edges of his mind. Wait. He'd seen these before. Hadn't he? The familiarity of their writhing forms made his stomach churn even more. It was as if some deeply buried part of his new self recognized them. A flash of something resurfaced, a distant memory, no, not his own, of plucking one of these creatures from the ground as it squealed faintly, its little mouthparts opening and closing as if pleading. The thought sent a shiver down his spine. Wait. Again. He muttered, the question barely audible. The Strobians twitched on the plate, their movements rhythmic and unsettling, and he felt a strange mix of revulsion and resignation bubbling within him. Right, he said, his voice faint. Thanks, Mom. Looks delicious. As he sat down and reluctantly picked up one of the Strobians, 1,000 thoughts raced through his mind. What was this place? How did he get here? And most importantly, why was the Galactic Empire Wrestling Federation playing on the small, holographic screen embedded in the wall? He watched the screen intently, his appetite forgotten. Two wrestlers clashed in the center of an arena that defied comprehension, its edges shimmering with energy fields that rippled with each impact. It was a totally different match from before. The larger wrestler lifted his opponent, a lithe, insectoid alien with wings, and slammed them into the ground with a force that shook the arena. The crowd roared, a cacophony of alien voices and cheers that resonated through the room. Someday, Mikhail whispered, his chest tightening with a mix of awe and longing. Someday, that's going to be me. The thought was absurd. He was a 10-year-old alien kid with a wiry frame and no combat experience. But deep down, Michael Caine's indomitable spirit burned brighter than ever. This was his second chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. As he chewed on the surprisingly tangy Strobian, a plan began to form in his mind. He didn't know how or when, but he was going to join the GEWF. He was going to rise through the ranks, defy the odds, and show the galaxy what it truly meant to be a wrestler. Because if there was one thing Michael Caine knew, it was this. The pain is real. The glory is eternal. And the legend is just beginning. Chapter 2, Dreams. The days that followed were an unsettling blur of discovery and revelation for Mikhail X'Cen. Each moment felt like a thread unraveling a tapestry he hadn't realized existed, his memories of Earth blending and interweaving with the 10 years of his current life. At first, it was disorienting, snatches of Michael Caine's days as an overzealous WWE superfan clashed with the strange yet oddly nostalgic recollections of alien spectacles. He remembered vividly the thrum of excitement as wrestlers ascended steel ladders in Earth's chaotic ladder royales. But now, those memories were joined by visions of the Laxian Death Cube, a brutal, shimmering cube where gravity shifted at random, and the only escape was pinning your opponent while avoiding a crushing collapse of the arena's walls. Or the Snark's Pit Wire Walker matches, where competitors balanced on razor-thin wires suspended over a pit of howling, carnivorous beasts. Those matches had been all the rage in the classic Xenon cycles, long before his current pupation. The term pupation echoed in his mind, a piece of Shorebraxian biology that made Michael Caine, the human, shudder. Pupation. As if his life, all 10 years of it, had been some kind of larval stage. The memories of this life surfaced with increasing clarity. He could recall his parents' expressions, the joy and trepidation when he emerged from his first pupation phase, his wiry, multi-limbed body too frail to withstand the rigors of their world. His parents had coddled him, fussed over his health, and kept him confined to a life of bed rest and small comforts. They had no idea, of course, who he truly was, or the tenacity that burned within him. Michael Caine would have never stood for such constraints, and neither would Mikhail X'Cen. Still, even that frustrated him. His parents weren't entirely wrong. This body had been weak. Sickly. For as long as he could remember, fever had gripped him with unrelenting cruelty, leaving him bedridden for weeks on end. But now, he felt different. Better. His body, alien though it was, thrummed with energy, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he could move without pain or exhaustion dogging his every step. The first morning he'd realized this, he'd nearly burst into tears, though he wasn't sure if it was relief or some leftover human sentimentality. That morning, his mother's relief had been evident. Her joy was painted in every word she spoke and in the way her 4 hands lingered on his shoulders as she murmured about how glad she was to see him up and active. But it was her next words that brought him back to the present. No more GEWF VR feeds, she had said firmly, her voice tinged with worry. You're still too young, Mikhail. Those matches are too intense for a Shorebraxian your age. Your father and I have decided it's best you stick to the highlights and analysis vids. Too young? The words rankled, clawing at his pride like the raking talons of some long-forgotten beast. Mikhail had barely managed to keep his expression neutral, though inside he seethed. They didn't understand. How could they? How could anyone who hadn't lived his lives? Wrestling wasn't just a spectacle. It wasn't even just a dream. It was survival. In a galaxy teeming with monsters, cybernetic brutes, and psychic gladiators, Mikhail knew that the only way to stand a chance was to train, to be ready. And he couldn't do that by watching sanitized highlight reels. Besides, she was only worried about how he had reacted last time. And then there was Shorebraxian culture, with all its aquatic grace and ancient traditions, was cautious, deliberate, and endlessly frustrating for someone like Mikhail. This new body had its advantages, though. He was learning its quirks. The way his forearms moved in perfect synchronization when he concentrated. The uncanny flexibility in his limbs, the wiry strength hidden in his sinews. Even his semi-aquatic heritage, something his people had abandoned eons ago, stirred in him like an instinct waiting to be tapped. Mikhail couldn't ignore the potential. He threw himself into research, diving headlong into the Galactic Empire galaxy-wide web. The GEWF was a chaotic, sprawling network of data streams and AI curators that spanned countless civilizations and systems. Its vastness made the Internet of Earth seem like a child's toy. But Mikhail navigated it with an intensity born of desperation, sifting through articles, forums, and instructional feeds. The paths into the Galactic Empire Wrestling Federation were manifold, but one route stood out: the scholarship matches. Every cycle, the GEWF held a series of matches across various systems, offering promising young wrestlers a chance to earn sponsorships and training at some of the galaxy's most prestigious wrestling schools. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, and Mikhail's best shot. Yet, the more he researched, the more daunting the task appeared. The competition was brutal. Participants ranged from bioengineered prodigies to psychic combatants who'd spent years immersed in VR training. Mikhail's frustration grew with every piece of information he uncovered. The rules forbidding him from VR matches burned brightest in his mind. It wasn't fair. His competitors had access to years of combat simulations, honing their instincts in ways he couldn't match. If he was going to stand a chance, he'd have to find a workaround. What his parents didn't know wouldn't hurt them, he decided. It was a thought that stirred an unfamiliar pang of guilt, but he pushed it aside. Sacrifices had to be made. Beyond that, there was the question of training. His newfound health gave him freedom he'd never had before, and he wasn't about to waste it. Mikhail started small, testing his limits in the confined space of his home. Push-ups, pull-ups, and stretches that strained the limits of his wiry Shorebraxian frame. At first, it was awkward. His balance wavered. His limbs flailed. But with each day, his movements became more fluid, his muscles responding with a strength he hadn't expected. He could feel his body adapting, growing stronger, and for the first time in either of his lives, he felt truly alive. The idea of a job came later, almost as an afterthought. He'd need funds if he was going to pull this off. Wrestling schools weren't cheap, and neither was the equipment he'd need to train properly. The thought of defying his parents still made him uneasy, but he reasoned that it was for the greater good. They'd understand eventually. Maybe. As Mikhail lay in the pod that night, staring at the strange, bioluminescent patterns that danced across the ceiling, his mind raced with possibilities. The GEWF was more than a dream. It was a calling. He could see it so clearly: the roar of the crowd, the dazzling lights, the thrill of victory. It wasn't just about fame or glory. It was about proving to himself, to the galaxy, that he could rise above the odds. That he could be more. The scholarship match was the first step. And Mikhail X'Cen, once and to be again Michael Caine, was ready to take it. Chapter 3, Portal of Possibility. For a Shorebraxian pupil like Mikhail X'Cen, life revolved around a strict, unyielding routine. Shorebraxian society held firm to its belief in the importance of structure during the pupation phase, a time seen as both sacred and precarious. For Mikhail, however, this rigidity was an ever-tightening noose. His parents, understandably protective after a decade of his fragile health, adhered to these routines with an almost religious fervor. But now, with his body finally showing signs of strength, every scheduled moment felt like an unbearable constraint. His day began as it always did, with the bath cycle. Shorebraxians were semi-aquatic by nature, though they had long since abandoned their ancestral oceans. Still, their biology demanded a certain level of immersion to maintain their skin and inner moisture balance. Mikhail's bath pod was a sleek, circular chamber filled with shimmering, nutrient-rich liquid. As he submerged himself, the fluid tingled against his skin, its faint bioluminescence casting ethereal ripples across the chamber walls. He tried to relax, but his mind churned with plans and frustrations. The bath cycle was supposed to be calming, a meditative start to the day, but for Mikhail, it was another symbol of the cage his routine had become. After the bath cycle came vitamin tube time. The tubes were sleek, transparent cylinders filled with a viscous, glowing substance that Shorebraxians consumed daily. Each tube was carefully calibrated to provide the exact nutrients needed for a growing pupa. Mikhail's mother, Janet X'Cen, always ensured his was prepared and waiting for him when he emerged from the bath. Janet X'Cen was a formidable presence, her tall, lithe frame marked by the intricate, bioluminescent patterns that denoted her lineage. Shorebraxians didn't have surnames like humans, their names were unique identifiers, each as singular as the individual it belonged to. Janet's name was one of the few things Mikhail felt a human connection to, though he often wondered if it was mere coincidence. Despite her stern demeanor, there was a warmth in her actions, a quiet, protective love that permeated everything she did. "Your tube, Mikhail," she said, her voice tinged with both affection and exasperation as she handed it to him. Mikhail accepted it, the glowing contents swirling as he tilted it. He drank it quickly, the taste vaguely metallic with a hint of sweetness. Breakfast followed. Shorebraxian meals were communal, but the morning meal was an exception, prepared solely by the household's primary caretaker. Janet served a dish of horned kelp, a farm seaweed protein grown and canned on the local moon. Its vibrant green strands were coiled neatly on the plate, their edges studded with tiny, crystalline protrusions that gave the kelp its name. The texture was firm, the flavor earthy and briny with a faint sweetness that lingered. Mikhail ate mechanically, his mind elsewhere. The subtle crunch of the kelp barely registered as he chewed, his thoughts consumed by his frustrations. After breakfast came the worst part of his day, the data learning pod. For 6 solar exposures, he was confined to the sleek, egg-shaped capsule, its interior aglow with streams of information. The pod's AI instructor guided him through lessons on Shorebraxian history, mathematics, and interstellar relations, its tone unwaveringly patient and precise. On Earth, learning had been a chore, but here, it was an unending slog. The information was vast, the expectations high, and the monotony unbearable. Mikhail often found his thoughts drifting as he stared at the holographic displays. He'd imagine himself in the GEWF arena, facing off against cybernetic titans and psionic gladiators. He'd picture the roar of the crowd, the blinding lights, the adrenaline coursing through his veins. But each time, the pod would chime, dragging him back to the present with a reminder to focus. After the learning session came the mandated medical nap. The nap pod was a cylindrical chamber lined with soft, cushioned material. It emitted a soothing hum, designed to lull its occupant into a deep, restorative sleep. Mikhail hated it. He didn't need the nap, not anymore. His body felt strong, alive in a way it never had before. But the doctor's orders were clear, and his parents enforced them without question. One solar exposure later, he was freed from the pod, groggy and irritable. But this was followed by the best part of his day, designated fun time. For most Shorebraxian pupae, this was a time for leisure, a chance to explore their interests and unwind. For Mikhail, it was an opportunity. While other pupae played games or indulged in creative pursuits, Mikhail trained. The family's recreation area housed an enhanced planar cube, a marvel of Shorebraxian engineering that had been designed purely for entertainment. It was a massive, floating cube that shimmered with shifting colors and patterns, its surfaces morphing to create puzzles, mazes, and other interactive challenges. Most pupae adored it, spending hours navigating its ever-changing interior. Mikhail used it differently. To him, the cube was a training ground. Its shifting surfaces honed his agility, its puzzles sharpened his mind, and its challenges pushed his endurance. When he wasn't actively engaging with it, he used the time to watch GEWF matches on the holographic screen, studying the techniques of its legendary fighters. But even this precious time felt insufficient. Mikhail's mind burned with ambition, his dreams too vast to be confined to the scant moments of freedom his routine allowed. He needed more. More time, more freedom, more opportunities to prepare. The scholarship match loomed large in his thoughts, a beacon of hope and possibility. But he couldn't compete if he remained tethered to this routine. As the day wound down, the family gathered for the communion of families, a sacred Shorebraxian tradition. The dining hall was alive with the hum of conversation, the air filled with the scent of freshly prepared live creatures. The communal feast was both a celebration and a sharing of daily experiences. Mikhail sat quietly, listening as his parents recounted their day and offered prayers to the Deep Ones. He shared little, keeping his plans and frustrations to himself. The Deep Ones, ancient beings revered by the Shorebraxians, loomed large in their culture, their influence felt in every aspect of life. Mikhail offered his prayers mechanically, his thoughts elsewhere. Finally, the day ended with the sleep pod. The chamber was filled with a faint, soporific gas designed to induce restful sleep, its interior lined with soft, bioluminescent patterns that pulsed gently in time with Mikhail's breathing. But tonight, sleep eluded him. As the gas began to take effect, he fought against it, his mind racing with plans and schemes. He needed more freedom. More time to train, to prepare, to become the wrestler he knew he could be. His parents wouldn't understand, not yet. But he couldn't wait for their approval. If he was going to succeed, he'd have to take matters into his own hands. As the gas finally claimed him, his last thoughts were of the GEWF arena, the roar of the crowd, and the limitless possibilities that lay ahead. But the days ticked by, and to Mikhail's surprise, his parents began to notice the changes in him. His father, Galactic X'Cen, who often watched quietly, seemed especially attuned to Mikhail's newfound energy and focus. It was only a matter of time before they said something, and Mikhail had been waiting for this moment. One evening, after the communion of families, Mikhail approached his parents with deliberate intent. He bowed his head slightly, a sign of respect in Shorebraxian culture, but his voice carried the conviction of someone who would not be denied. "Mother, father," he began, his 4 eyes glowing with determination. "I wish to ask something of you. I've grown stronger, haven't I? You've seen it too. Please, let me train properly. I want to make our family, our people, proud. I want to show the galaxy what a Shorebraxian can do in the GEWF." Janet exchanged a glance with Galactic, her bioluminescent patterns flickering with uncertainty. Galactic, however, remained silent, his expression unreadable. Mikhail pressed on, sensing a crack in their resolve. "If nothing else," he continued, "please let me earn the right to watch the GEWF matches in VR. I will prove my strength, my dedication. Test me, if you must." The room fell silent, save for the faint hum of the home's ambient systems. Janet looked to Galactic once more, her patterns dimming as if deferring the decision to him. Finally, Galactic's voice broke the tension, deep and measured. "A test, then," he said, his lower set of eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "The enhanced planar cube has features you've never explored, Mikhail. If you can master them, perhaps you're ready for the next step." Mikhail's brow furrowed in confusion. "What feature? I've used the cube for everything. I know it inside and out." Galactic's response was a knowing smile, his upper set of eyes closing while the lower ones gleamed. "You think you do. But one day outside of the learning pod will do you well. Let me show you." Excitement and trepidation churned in Mikhail's chest as he followed his father into the recreation area. The enhanced planar cube shimmered as always, its surfaces alive with shifting patterns. Galactic placed a hand on one of its glowing edges, and with a low hum, the cube began to morph, its layers rearranging to form a structure Mikhail had never seen before. "This," Galactic said, stepping back, "is the true challenge. Tomorrow, you will face it. And then we will see what you're capable of." The cube hummed with life, its surfaces erupting into a cascade of iridescent light, each hue shifting like liquid fire caught in a storm. The transformation was a spectacle of motion and sound, its once solid planes began to ripple and undulate as if alive, a heartbeat echoing faintly through the room. Where before it had been a simple training tool of shifting puzzles and mazes, it now seemed to unfold into infinite layers, peeling back like the petals of an impossible flower. Every edge gleamed with otherworldly precision, casting shadows that danced and flickered with a life of their own. Mikhail's breath caught as the cube expanded outward, a shimmering veil of energy unfurling from its core to form a pulsing, portal-like surface. The air around it seemed to bend and twist, refracting reality itself into an ever-changing kaleidoscope of shapes. The portal pulsed rhythmically, exuding a low, resonant hum that vibrated deep within Mikhail's chest. It was not merely a tool now, it was a doorway, a challenge, a promise of something far greater than what he had known. "This is its spatial mode," Galactic explained, his tone calm yet tinged with pride. "A feature most only activate during advanced stages of development. It generates pocket dimensions, enclosed spaces tailored to challenge both mind and body. Each trial is unique, designed to push its participant to their limits." Mikhail stepped closer, the surface of the cube's portal reflecting faintly in his 4 wide eyes. The possibilities whirled in his mind. This wasn't just play or even training, it was something entirely new. Something real. A chance to prove himself in a way he hadn't thought possible. You will enter tomorrow, Yeltrick continued. The objective will be simple, complete the course within the time limit. Efficiency and precision matter. The cube will measure everything. What happens if I fail? Mikhail asked, though his tone held more curiosity than fear. Yeltrick's lower set of eyes narrowed, his expression hardening into something far sterner. Failure will mean you are not ready, Mikhail, he said, his tone sharp and unwavering. And if that happens, this experiment ends. You will not try again until you leave the Shorebraxian nest and prove that you're capable of taking this seriously. I will not have you wasting your potential on reckless ambition. He leaned in slightly, his gaze locking onto Mikhail's. This is your chance to show discipline and readiness. Do not squander it. Mikhail nodded, his thoughts already racing ahead to tomorrow. How would the dimension look? What kind of obstacles would it throw at him? He couldn't help but feel a flicker of impatience, wishing he could enter right now. But as his father turned to leave, the faintest flicker of wisdom passed across his mind. Preparation would be key. Tonight, he would strategize, think about how best to tackle whatever lay ahead. As the glow of the cube dimmed slightly in its dormant state, Mikhail stood alone in the recreation area, his heart pounding with anticipation. Tomorrow would be the beginning of something new. Something that could bring him closer to his dream. Chapter 4, Inside the Cube. Mikhail's heart pounded with a mixture of anticipation and defiance as the solar rotation dragged on. His excitement had been building steadily, threatening to burst from his chest like a wrestler leaping off the top rope. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced since the Blood Feud match tournament in Zeta Prime during his 7th year of pupation. That legendary event had consumed his imagination for cycles, leaving an indelible mark on his young mind. The Blood Feud tournament was born of an ancient rivalry between the Galactic and the Lithorn clans, two species whose interstellar disputes spanned generations. Their blood feud culminated in this brutal, no-holds-barred competition, where honor and vengeance intertwined in a spectacle that captured the attention of the entire galaxy. In Zeta Prime, the matches unfolded in a coliseum built to reflect the grandeur of the event, its towering spires glinting in tidally locked orbit with the system's three suns. Mikhail could still picture it vividly, the roar of the crowd as warriors clashed in arenas tailored to their species' strengths. There were electrified fields for the Lithorn, whose hardened exoskeletons absorbed the energy, and gravity-altered zones for the Galactics, masters of aerial combat. The final match was seared into his memory, a Galactic champion named Arctur, whose wings shimmered like molten gold, against a Lithorn warrior clad in gleaming obsidian armor. Their blows shook the Colosseum, each strike a testament to their unyielding resolve. When Arctur leapt from a gravity spike and delivered a mid-air strike that shattered his opponent's defenses, the crowd's deafening cheer sent shivers down Mikhail's spine. But just as the Lithorn warrior crumpled to the ground, seemingly defeated, chaos erupted. The referees had declared no additional run-ons, yet two figures emerged from the shadows and stormed the arena. The crowd's reaction was a mix of exhilaration and confusion, their cheers mingling with cries of alarm. The commentator's voice boomed over the chaos, frantic and disbelieving. The ref said no run-ons. The ref said no run-ons. How did they get past the DNA scanners? Mikhail remembered leaning forward, his four eyes wide with disbelief as the camera zoomed in on the intruders. The Colosseum erupted into pandemonium as it became clear that these weren't just random attackers. The commentator's voice reached a fever pitch. Look! They're genetically identical. Clones. 3 genetically identical clones. This technically isn't a run-on. The clones were a perfect match, their movements synchronized as they converged on Arctur. One clone tackled the referee, silencing the official with a swift blow, while the other two joined the fallen Lithorn in a coordinated assault. The crowd's energy surged as Arctur, once mere seconds from victory, found himself fighting a 3-on-1 battle. The shimmering golden wings that had carried him to triumph now struggled to fend off the onslaught of fists and coordinated strikes. Mikhail could still hear the commentator's desperate cries. This isn't regulation. Somebody stop this. But wait. Technically, it's within the rules. The clones have found a loophole. The chaos unfolded in a blur of motion and sound, the clones' strategy both brutal and methodical. Arctur fought valiantly, his golden wings a flurry of strikes and parries, but the odds were overwhelming. The crowd's roars swelled to a crescendo, their reactions divided between outrage and exhilaration. For young Mikhail, it was a moment that cemented his obsession with the spectacle and unpredictability of the Blood Feud tournament. Even now, the memory of the tournament ignited a spark within him. But today, this test, this challenge, would eclipse even that. Today, he wasn't just watching. He was the competitor. Despite the surging excitement, a bitter edge of determination sharpened his thoughts. Yeltrick's words during the communion of families had been steeped in a calculated sternness. It was as though his father expected failure, anticipated it as an inevitable lesson in the dangers of rebellion and the virtues of Shorebraxian patience. Yeltrick's tone, his posture, all of it had been deliberate, carrying the weight of expectation. But Mikhail refused to be a cautionary tale. Michael Caine. That was the name that burned in his mind, the name he'd carried to the heights of the GEWF. It wasn't just a name, it was a promise. A declaration. To Mikhail, it sounded foreign and impossibly cool compared to the heavy syllables of Shorebraxian high tongue or the clipped cadence of Galactic common. Michael Caine had a sharpness to it, a flair that stood apart from the drudgery of Shorebraxian cultural names. It wasn't just a name he bore, it was a banner he waved in defiance of everything mundane. In the Galactic Empire, his name would be shouted across systems, emblazoned on holoscreens, echoing through the arenas of the GEWF. The mere thought of it filled him with a fire that couldn't be quenched, a drive to ensure that when the universe heard Michael Caine, they would think of something, someone, unforgettable. Several solar and lunar exposures later, the moment arrived. He stood before the enhanced planar cube, its shimmering surfaces alive with faint, kaleidoscopic light. The recreation area seemed to hum with expectation, as though the cube itself anticipated the test. Yeltrick stood beside him, his tall frame radiating an aura of quiet authority. Pride glinted faintly in his lower set of eyes, but it was tempered by the stern lines etched into his features. His father's voice cut through the air, calm and deliberate. "This feature of the cube is not to be taken lightly," Yeltrick said, his tone unyielding. "It is dangerous and only to be used with permission. This is not a game, Mikhail. It is a tool, a challenge meant to teach discipline and resilience." With a practiced motion, Yeltrick swiped over the cube's controls. The mechanisms within began to shift, their inner workings a symphony of whirring gears and faintly glowing conduits. The cube's surface seemed to ripple, and then, with a final resounding hum, it produced a swirling blue portal that shimmered like liquid light. The sight of it was mesmerizing, its surface undulating as though it were alive. "This will be your test," Yeltrick continued, his voice firm. "Inside the maze, large orbs will roll along predetermined paths. Your task is to collect the simulated Galsabine fruits scattered throughout and exit the maze before the clock reaches 0. Be warned, if an orb touches you, you will be expelled from the portal, and the test will end in failure. You will have 3 solar exposures to complete the task. The clock inside the arena will count down your time." Yeltrick's lower eyes locked onto Mikhail's. "Understand this, Mikhail. Many young Shorebraxians attempt the cube's advanced features too early. Failure is acceptable, but it will mean waiting. No retries, no shortcuts. You will learn patience and readiness, or you will learn nothing." The words hung heavy in the air, but Mikhail felt a fierce determination rising within him. He nodded once, stepping forward toward the portal. The shimmering surface beckoned, and without hesitation, he crossed the threshold. The sensation was surreal. For a brief moment, the world around him dissolved into a swirling vortex of blue and silver light. It wasn't disorienting so much as overwhelming, as though he were being enveloped by the very essence of the cube. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it ended. He stepped out into a new world, and his breath caught. The arena was breathtaking. A vast, simulated sky stretched above him, painted in hues of bright azure and streaked with wisps of white clouds. The air was warm, carrying a faint, tropical scent that mingled with the subtle hum of the arena's hidden mechanisms. Surrounding him was a maze of intricately carved stone, its walls adorned with faintly glowing glyphs that pulsed in rhythmic patterns. The stonework was beautiful, reminiscent of ancient temples from Earth, and yet unmistakably alien. A floating clock hovered high above the maze, its countdown already ticking. 3 solar exposures. That was all the time he had. Mikhail wasted no time, scanning his surroundings and moving forward with purpose. The maze's paths were wide but winding, their intersections branching off in multiple directions. The glowing glyphs along the walls seemed to shift as he passed, almost as if the maze were alive. It wasn't long before he encountered his first Galsabine fruit. The simulated object was vibrant, its surface a swirl of rich orange and deep purple hues. It rested on a pedestal at the end of a corridor, its glow faint but enticing. Mikhail approached cautiously, his senses alert. As he reached out to grab it, he heard it, the faint, rhythmic thudding of something massive rolling in the distance. Turning sharply, he saw it. The orb. A colossal sphere of polished metal, its surface reflecting the maze like a distorted mirror. It rolled with unnerving speed, following a set path that intersected with his own. The sound of its movement grew louder, a low, resonant rumble that sent vibrations through the ground. Panic flared for a brief moment, but Mikhail forced it down. He had trained for this. As the orb barreled closer, he scanned the corridor for an escape. There, just ahead, a crossing pathway. He sprinted toward it, his 4 legs pumping with adrenaline-fueled precision. The orb bore down on him, its size and speed creating a sense of impending doom. At the last possible moment, he leapt into the side passage, his heart pounding as the orb thundered past, missing him by mere inches. The sound of the orb faded as it continued down its path, but Mikhail knew this was only the beginning. The maze's beauty belied its danger. This was no simple test of agility, it was a trial of focus, strategy, and endurance. He clutched the Galactic fruit tightly, its faint glow a small victory, and pressed onward. Each turn of the maze brought new challenges. The orbs followed intricate paths, their patterns designed to corner and trap. Some corridors were dead ends, forcing Mikhail to backtrack and reassess. The clock above ticked steadily downward, a constant reminder of his limited time. But with each fruit he collected, a surge of determination pushed him forward. This was more than a test. It was a proving ground. The simulated sky above began to shift, its colors deepening into shades of amber and crimson as the solar exposures waned. Sweat slicked Mikhail's skin as he navigated the maze, his muscles burning with exertion. He pushed forward, his mind narrating every step like the commentary of a legendary match. The pain is real. The glory is eternal. The legend is Mikhail Caine. The words echoed in his thoughts, a mantra of defiance and determination. He wouldn't give up. Not in the ring, not in life, and certainly not here. The orbs loomed like adversaries, relentless and unyielding, but Mikhail moved with purpose. Each step, every leap, was a declaration, he would prevail. As the final solar exposure ticked away, Mikhail rounded a corner and saw it, the exit. The glowing archway pulsed with a welcoming light, its glyphs shifting in intricate patterns. But between him and the exit was one last orb, its path blocking the narrow corridor. The fruit he carried felt heavy in his hands, its glow a reminder of how far he'd come. Taking a deep breath, Mikhail timed the orb's movements, watching as it rolled past the corridor's entrance. He had only seconds to act. With a burst of speed, he sprinted forward, his legs carrying him toward the exit. The orb shifted, its trajectory adjusting slightly, but Mikhail didn't falter. As it bore down on him, he dove through the archway, the sensation of the orb's shadow brushing against him sending a chill down his spine. And then he was through. The maze dissolved behind him, its simulated walls fading into the familiar glow of the recreation area. The portal shimmered once before closing, leaving Mikhail standing before the dormant cube, the Galactic fruit still in his hands. Yeltrik's expression was unreadable as he approached, his lower eyes studying Mikhail intently. After a long moment, he spoke, his tone almost cautious. "You've done well, Mikhail. Perhaps too well." There was a pause, his words hanging in the air like the tension before the bell of a championship match. Yeltrik's gaze shifted to the glowing surface of his personal cube monocle, a device clipped over one of his lower eyes, its interface flickering with data only he could see. His bioluminescent patterns pulsed faintly, betraying a rare flicker of unease. Mikhail watched, his heart pounding again, but not from exertion this time. What was his father seeing? What had he done to evoke such a reaction? Yeltrik finally broke the silence, his voice firmer now, but with an undercurrent of something that sounded almost like doubt. "You have the day off, Mikhail. Rest. Prepare yourself. We will discuss this further at communion." With that, he turned, leaving Mikhail standing alone in the recreation area, the dormant cube casting long shadows across the room. The words lingered in his mind, a mixture of pride and dread swirling in his thoughts as he tried to decipher his father's cryptic reaction. Chapter 5: The Weight of True Talent. The atmosphere in the home was tense, a subtle but palpable shift in its usual rhythm. The bioluminescent patterns that adorned the walls seemed dimmer, their soft glow less vibrant than usual. Mikhail's mother, Janet X'Cen, moved about the household with a quiet unease, her usual grace tinged with an unfamiliar heaviness. She seemed sad, almost scared, as though burdened by a conversation she'd had with Yeltrik earlier. Mikhail, however, refused to let it affect his mood. Pride surged within him, he had earned his father's acknowledgement, a rare and precious thing. Yeltrik's decision to grant him free time for the day was a victory in itself, a mark of respect for his performance in the maze. No training, no regimented schedules. Just a day to rest and indulge. He planned to spend most of it watching GEWF matches and recovering from the sheer exhaustion of the challenge. As he settled into the recreation area, he grabbed the enhanced planar cube, its glowing surfaces now dormant, and absent-mindedly toyed with its edges while queuing up a new match on the holoscreen. The cube's weight in his hands was comforting, a tactile reminder of his achievement. The match he selected wasn't one of the grand galactic tournaments but a local event, streamed directly from a nearby GEWF arena. He had started focusing on these smaller-scale matches recently, trying to decipher the strategic trends and tactics of the local wrestling scene. The match began with a dramatic introduction, the arena's holographic displays flashing vivid animations as the fighters entered. First was Shorebraxian the Tactician, a living swarm of nanites from Cognitus, the AI-dominated world where machines had long surpassed biological beings. Shorebraxian was renowned for his calculated strategies, his ability to adapt and counter his opponents with surgical precision. The holograms surrounding him displayed shifting diagrams and simulations, emphasizing his analytical approach to combat. His opponent, X'Cen the Graviton Thorn, was a stark contrast. A towering brute from the mining colonies of Cassandria Prime, X'Cen exuded raw, unrefined power. His massive gravity-assist mining gauntlets gleamed under the arena lights, their weighty presence a testament to the harsh environment of his homeworld. Where Shorebraxian was sleek and methodical, X'Cen was a force of nature, a tidal wave of fury waiting to be unleashed. The commentators couldn't help but speculate on how the two wildly different styles would clash. The referee stepped forward, her voice amplified across the arena. The rules for this match are as follows: no allies, no run-ons, no chairs, tables, or other furniture. This is a clean fight. Let's keep it that way. The crowd roared as the fighters squared off in the ring, anticipation crackling through the air like an electrical charge. The bell rang, and the match began. Shorebraxian moved first, his nanite body shifting and reforming with unsettling fluidity. Within moments, he began 3D printing fluorescent light tubes from his own mass, the fragile glass weapons materializing in his grasp. With eerie precision, he hurled the tubes at X'Cen, the arena lighting up with the flashes of shattering glass. Tiny fragments of Shorebraxian himself detached and swarmed X'Cen, each piece wielding a miniature tube and targeting vulnerable points with unnerving accuracy. The commentators erupted in disbelief. "Is this even legal?" one exclaimed. "Those are light bulbs. Are light bulbs considered furniture? We've never seen this tactic before in the GEWF." X'Cen, caught off guard by the relentless assault, stumbled backward under the barrage. The fluorescent tube shattered against his gauntlets and shoulders, the glass shards scattering across the mat. The crowd's reaction was mixed, some cheered for Shorebraxian's ingenuity, while others booed what they saw as an underhanded tactic. Meanwhile, X'Cen's coach was on his feet, shouting at the officials and demanding a ruling. "Shorebraxian is exploiting the rules," the commentator continued, his tone incredulous. "Light bulbs technically aren't furniture, but this feels like a loophole if I've ever seen one. And look at X'Cen's coach, he's absolutely livid." The referee stepped in, halting the match momentarily. "Light bulbs," she announced, her voice firm, "are not furniture and are therefore legal. However, Shorebraxian is in violation of the no allies rule. Body splitting, as clarified in the most recent GEWF updates, constitutes creating allies. The match will resume without the use of auxiliary nanites." The crowd erupted in cheers and boos, the arena a chaotic symphony of noise. Shorebraxian retracted his scattered fragments, his form coalescing back into a singular entity. The pause had given X'Cen just enough time to regain his footing, and as the match resumed, he roared with fury. The graviton surged forward, his gauntlets whirring to life as he unleashed a devastating combination of strikes. Each blow reverberated through the arena, the sheer force of his attacks causing the very mat to tremble. The momentum shifted dramatically. Shorebraxian, unable to rely on his numbers advantage, struggled to keep up with X'Cen's relentless assault. The towering miner pressed his advantage, driving his opponent into the corner of the ring. Glass shards crunched underfoot as he delivered a crushing blow, his gauntlet slamming into Shorebraxian's shifting form. Sparks flew, and the crowd's energy reached a fever pitch. "X'Cen is turning this match around." The commentator shouted, barely audible over the noise. "The graviton is unstoppable." The final moments of the match were a blur of motion and impact. X'Cen, battered and bloodied but fueled by sheer determination, delivered a devastating uppercut with his gravity-assist gauntlet that sent Shorebraxian's shifting form crumpling to the mat. Sparks erupted from the AI combatant's core as the impact reverberated through the arena. The referee dove into position, her hand slapping the mat with each resounding count. 1, 2, 3. The bell rang, a triumphant clang that was almost drowned out by the deafening roar of the crowd. X'Cen staggered to his feet, every movement a testament to the grueling battle he had endured. As he stood victorious, the mat beneath Shorebrax emitted a sharp electric pulse, jolting through the AI's core and causing his shifting form to shudder violently before going still. In the GEWF, the fights were as real as the stakes, and the pinning condition on the mat in this arena ensured a decisive end. Shorebrax's defeat was absolute. The commentators jumped on the moment with their usual flair. And that's it. X'Cen the Graviton Thorn seals the deal with that crushing uppercut. But look at Shorebrax, ouch, that's a shutdown. He's out, folks. It'll take months to re-download him back to Cognitus, maybe years. Another commentator chimed in, chuckling. Especially with Cognitus stuck on sub-Empire standard data squirts. That's what you get for downgrading your infrastructure. We might not see Shorebrax back in the ring this century. The crowd's cheers reached a fever pitch as X'Cen raised one massive gauntlet into the air, his victory pose raw and powerful. Fans erupted from their seats, their voices blending into a tidal wave of approval that shook the very walls of the arena. Meanwhile, a brief holo ad popped up on the lower corner of the screen, empirical data squirters, the best in the biz for AI revives. Because downtime is no time. The commentators struggled to contain their excitement. He did it. X'Cen the Graviton Thorn has pulled off one of the greatest comebacks in recent GEWF history. Against all odds, the underdog miner from Cassandria Prime has taken down Shorebrax the Tactician in a match we'll be talking about for cycles. Mikhail leapt up from his seat, the exhaustion of the day completely forgotten. He pumped his fist in the air, yelling along with the crowd. Yes. That's how you do it. That's a legend right there. He bounded around the room in a burst of unrestrained energy, mimicking X'Cen's finishing moves in exaggerated fashion. Grabbing a pillow from the couch, he held it high like a championship belt, circling the recreation area with triumphant strides. The glow of the holoscreen cast flickering light across his face, his four eyes sparkling with excitement. The Graviton. Nobody can stop him, he shouted, his voice cracking with the sheer joy of the moment. In that instant, he wasn't just a kid watching a match, he was there, part of the action, imagining his name chanted by billions of fans across the galaxy. Michael Caine would one day stand in that ring, triumphant just like X'Cen. He could see it, feel it, as real as the pulse pounding in his chest. Mikhail sat transfixed, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten. The match had been a masterpiece of strategy, adaptability, and raw power. He couldn't help but analyze every move, every tactic, imagining how he might one day face opponents of similar caliber. The GEWF wasn't just a dream, it was a world of endless possibilities, and he was determined to carve out his place within it. The joy of free time overwhelmed the lingering stress from the maze challenge. For Mikhail, this was the best kind of day, a rare reprieve from routine and a chance to immerse himself in what he loved most. Since awakening here from Earth, one thing had consistently brightened his days. No matter how many channels he flipped through, there was always an amazing match airing on the GEWF channel. Wrestling wasn't just a sport in the galaxy, it was the sport, a universal spectacle unmatched in its scale and intensity. The hours until communion of families were spent in decompressive glee. Mikhail sprawled across the soft cushioning of the recreation area, absent-mindedly toying with the enhanced planar cube while match after match filled the holoscreen with high-octane action. Each bout was a masterpiece, showcasing wrestlers of unimaginable skill and creativity, their moves pushing the limits of physical and technological prowess. These weren't just athletes, they were legends in the making. One particularly captivating match featured a fighter from a biomechanical species, his fluid movements merging seamlessly with dazzling tech enhancements. Another showcased the battle in low gravity, the combatants leaping and twisting with surreal grace. Each match stoked Mikhail's excitement, his mind racing with ideas and strategies he might one day use in the ring. The rest of the galaxy saw the GEWF as entertainment. For Mikhail, it was inspiration. As the time for communion drew near, Mikhail reluctantly turned off the holoscreen. The glow of exhilaration still lingered, but as he stepped into the dining hall, the atmosphere changed. The joy of the day dimmed under the weight of the room's tension. Yeltrick and Janet sat across from each other, their expressions solemn. The bioluminescent patterns on their skin pulsed faintly, a visual echo of their unspoken emotions. Mikhail's mother looked almost pained, her usual composure tinged with a sadness that unsettled him. Yeltrick's demeanor was stern, but his eyes betrayed a glimmer of something more complex, pride, concern, and perhaps even regret. As Mikhail took his seat, the air felt heavy with the anticipation of words that were difficult to say. Finally, Yeltrick spoke, his voice steady but grave. Mikhail, there is something you must understand about the maze challenge you completed. Mikhail straightened, his heart quickening. What about it? I passed, didn't I? You said I did well. Yeltrick nodded, but his expression remained serious. Yes, you passed. More than that, you excelled. But the maze was not just a test of skill. It is a rite, a tradition within Shorebraxian culture, meant to teach pupae the limits of their mortality. To remind them that failure is not just possible, but inevitable, and that patience is as important as determination. Janet looked down, her hands clasped tightly together. Yeltrick continued. Most pupae fail. That is the point. The maze is designed to adapt to the individual, to test their willpower and their capacity to persevere. Collecting the third fruit is considered passing. Collecting all four is extraordinarily rare. Mikhail's chest swelled with pride. I got all four, though. Doesn't that mean I did better than anyone else? Yeltrick hesitated, glancing at Janet before answering. You did. In fact, you scored higher than any pupa in recorded history. The cube reports its data back to a central ranking system, a list of all who have attempted the challenge. You are now the highest-ranked pupa ever. Mikhail blinked, the words sinking in. Isn't that good? He asked, his voice uncertain. Why does it feel like you're upset? Janet's bioluminescent patterns dimmed further, her voice soft but strained. Because, Mikhail, this is not something to celebrate lightly. Such an achievement draws attention, attention that could be dangerous. The maze was meant to be a lesson, not a platform. And yet... She trailed off, looking to Yeltrick for support. Her husband's gaze met Mikhail's, and for the first time, his voice carried a note of vulnerability. You've shown extraordinary potential. But potential has a cost. The question now is whether you are ready to bear it. Mikhail's pride wavered, confusion clouding his thoughts. But why is it bad to be the best? Isn't that what everyone wants? His parents exchanged a glance, their silence heavy with unspoken fears. Mikhail felt the weight of their emotions pressing down on him, and for the first time, the exhilaration of his achievement began to dim. He was left with questions that had no immediate answers, and a sense that his journey had only just begun. Chapter 6, The Deep. The weight of his parents' words lingered in the air, a palpable tension that made the usually comfortable family dining space feel foreign and cold. Mikhail's gaze darted between his mother's somber expression and his father's unyielding gaze. The gravity of their discussion had taken a turn he hadn't anticipated. It is not necessarily a bad thing, Janet began, her tone measured, as though she were trying to convince herself as much as him. We're just confused. Such resolve, such willpower, is not something we see often in a pupa. Yeltrick's eyes narrowed slightly, studying Mikhail with a mixture of pride and wariness. It is something sought after by the deep ones, he added, his voice resonating with a weight that seemed to echo through the room. The mention of the deep ones sent a chill down Mikhail's spine. These were the beings his family prayed to every day, the ancient entities that Shorebraxian culture revered above all else. He'd always considered them more of an abstract concept than anything tangible. But now, they were being spoken of as though they were very, very real. Janet's bioluminescent patterns pulsed faintly, a subtle indicator of her unease. How did you manage to hold out against the maze for so long? She asked softly. Most would have failed long before reaching the fourth fruit. Even the third is considered an exceptional feat. Mikhail's heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't tell them the truth. The memories of Earth, the drive instilled by his previous life as a wrestling superfan, the hours spent dreaming of victory, none of it would make sense to them. More importantly, none of it would be accepted. He already felt the fragile balance of trust teetering on the edge, and he didn't dare push it further. He stammered at first, searching for a plausible explanation. I treated it like a match, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. My first ranked match. I thought about the GEWF, about how I wanted to train in VR. I told myself I had to win. That it was the only way. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. He watched his parents carefully as they absorbed his words. Janet's expression softened, her bioluminescent patterns flickering faintly with what he hoped was relief. Yeltrick remained silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on Mikhail as though trying to peer into his very soul. Finally, he nodded. That is an answer I can understand, Yeltrick said. You sought to honor our family, to prove your worth. And in doing so, you have brought great attention to yourself. The deep ones have been alerted to your presence, Mikhail. They have noticed you. The words landed like a blow, their weight sinking into Mikhail's chest. What does that mean? he asked, his voice tinged with a mix of awe and dread. Janet inhaled deeply, her patterns dimming further. It means that you will be summoned, she said. The Deep Ones will decide what happens next. It is a great honor, Mikhail, but it is also difficult. Their decisions are final. If they choose, they may relocate you, even though you are still a pupa. You may begin a form of schooling or training, but it will be according to their desires, not ours. Mikhail's breath caught. You mean, I won't be here anymore? Janet nodded, her expression pained. If that is their will, it is no longer up to us. Yeltric's voice was firmer, though there was a flicker of something almost vulnerable in his tone. You have done what no other pupa has. You have brought great honor to our family, but with that honor comes the responsibility to serve the greater purpose. The envoy of the Deep Ones will arrive in the morning. Prepare yourself, Mikhail. The words hit him like a stone-cold elbow from the top rope. He wanted freedom, yes, but this wasn't what he had in mind. How had his desire to train in VR spiraled into this? And would the Deep Ones allow him to pursue his dream of the GEWF, or had he inadvertently sabotaged himself by exceeding Shorebraxian norms? The next morning came too quickly. The home was unusually quiet, the normal hum of activity replaced by a tense stillness. Mikhail had little to pack. Like most Shorebraxians, he possessed few personal belongings. His departure wasn't meant to be sad, it was a time of transition, a rite of passage. But as he stood in the doorway, the weight of what he was leaving behind settled heavily on his shoulders. The arrival of the envoy of the Deep Ones was both awe-inspiring and unnerving. The creatures emerged from a sleek, enigmatic vehicle that seemed to hum with an energy that defied explanation. They were clad in suits that resembled Earth astronaut gear, their true forms obscured by the reflective surfaces of their helmets. The air around them seemed to ripple faintly, as though reality itself bent to accommodate their presence. The vehicle itself was unlike anything Mikhail had ever seen. Sleek and streamlined, it emitted a low, resonant hum as it hovered just above the ground. When he stepped inside, he was struck by the openness of its design. For the first time in his life, Mikhail could see the world outside his home, the real Shorebraxia. Vast oceans stretched out in every direction, their surfaces shimmering under the faint light of the system's twin suns. The few patches of land were dominated by sprawling industrial complexes, automated construction sites, and towering machinery that belched steam and fumes into the air. It was a harsh, industrialized landscape, a stark contrast to the carefully curated environments within his home. Mikhail stared out in a mixture of awe and discomfort. It was strange, and oddly gross, but it was real. The vehicle began its descent into the ocean, its hull glowing faintly as it plunged into the depths. At first, the darkness was oppressive, the water around them an inky black void. Mikhail felt a pang of fear, his mind conjuring images of unseen creatures lurking just beyond the glow of the vehicle's lights. But as they descended further, faint glimmers appeared in the distance, growing steadily brighter. When they finally emerged into the light, Mikhail's breath caught. Below them was a sprawling underwater city that seemed to shimmer with a life of its own, a mesmerizing dance of light and form. Bioluminescent patterns pulsed in harmonious rhythms across every surface, casting shifting hues of azure, emerald, and violet that illuminated the dark expanse of the ocean around it. Towers of coral-like material spiraled upward, their intricate surfaces studded with what looked like living jewels, each one glowing faintly as if breathing in time with the city itself. Massive bridges, seemingly woven from strands of pearlescent fibers, arched gracefully between the towers. Their surfaces glimmered with threads of light that ebbed and flowed, guiding unseen currents of energy. The pathways below were bustling with Shorebraxians and other beings, their figures moving in fluid synchrony, illuminated by the soft glow emanating from the ground itself. The city's layout was both organic and deliberate, as though it had grown naturally yet was touched by a guiding intelligence. Above, translucent domes enclosed some of the tallest spires, their interiors revealing lush gardens filled with bioluminescent flora. Streams of light flowed like rivers between the buildings, cascading into glowing pools that dotted the city's lower levels. The water itself seemed alive, teeming with luminescent creatures that darted through the currents, their movements adding another layer of vibrancy to the scene. Far below, massive conduits connected the city to the ocean floor, their surfaces throbbing with energy as they siphoned geothermal power from the depths. Around these conduits, glowing glyphs pulsed with a mysterious rhythm, their patterns reminiscent of the prayers Mikhail had seen etched into the walls of his home. It was as if the city itself was a living entity, a symbiotic union of technology and biology. Everywhere Mikhail looked, there was motion and light, a symphony of color and form that defied his understanding. The awe he felt was tinged with a strange familiarity, as though he had glimpsed this place in dreams or stories long forgotten. It was beautiful, otherworldly, and overwhelming all at once, a testament to the ingenuity and transcendent artistry of Shorebraxian culture. As they approached the city, Mikhail remembered a lesson from the learning pod. The Deep Ones, revered as gods, were said to reside in these underwater sanctuaries, their presence a guiding force for Shorebraxian society. The thought sent a shiver down his spine. He was about to meet them, to stand before beings he had only ever known through prayers and stories. The vehicle docked, and the envoys gestured for him to follow. One of the suited figures approached him, their reflective helmet obscuring any hint of a face. A faint hiss emanated from their suit as they extended a device toward him, a compact, translucent sphere that seemed to shimmer faintly in the ambient light. "Place this on your skin," the envoy said, their voice distorted, as though filtered through layers of static and water. Mikhail hesitated but obeyed, pressing the device to his arm. Instantly, it expanded, encasing him in a thin, pliable bubble. The sensation was disorienting, the world around him muffled and warped as if he were trapped inside a glass jar. Every sound, the hum of the vehicle, the faint pulse of the city's bioluminescence, became distant and tinny. "This will protect you," the envoy added. The transition can be unsettling. When Mikhail stepped out of the vehicle, his first instinct was fear. The immense pressure of the ocean should have crushed him instantly, yet the bubble held firm. He took a cautious breath and realized he could breathe effortlessly, the bubble filtering the water into breathable air. The experience was surreal. As he moved, the bubble adapted, its membrane allowing water to flow in and out without breaking. Each step felt as though he was walking through shifting currents, the water around him alternately clinging and parting. The city's pathways alternated between air pockets and submerged zones, each transition seamless and almost magical. One moment, Mikhail's bubble filled with air as he stepped into an open space surrounded by shimmering towers. The next, he was fully submerged, the bubble adapting without so much as a ripple. The sensation of moving between elements left him feeling as though he were part of the city's rhythm, a participant in its silent, flowing dance. The suited envoy stayed close, their reflective visor occasionally tilting as if observing him. As they neared the city's pathways, the suits that had encased the envoys began to shimmer and ripple, the reflective surfaces dissolving seamlessly into flowing dust with intricate bioluminescent patterns. The transformation was so smooth and natural that it seemed as though the suits had never existed at all. The envoys now looked almost ordinary within the city's radiant ambience, their movements fluid and unimpeded. Mikhail couldn't help but glance at them, curiosity mingling with unease. "Is this how you always move around here?" he asked, his voice sounding oddly distant within the bubble. "Not for us," the envoy replied, their tone unreadable. "But for you, it is necessary. The city is not kind to outsiders who are unprepared." As Mikhail moved farther from the vehicle, the bubble encasing him shimmered, its surface rippling like liquid glass. Slowly, it began to contract, its texture shifting seamlessly into a flowing robe that clung lightly to his frame. The transformation was unnervingly smooth, the suit now resembling Shorebraxian ceremonial wear, complete with faintly glowing glyphs that pulsed in harmony with the bioluminescent patterns of the city around him. Mikhail flexed his fingers experimentally, marveling at how natural it felt despite its alien origin. He opened his mouth to speak and found that his voice came out clear and unhindered. I feel normal now. What just happened?" The envoy tilted their reflective helmet, observing him with an inscrutable air. "Your adaptation is complete. The robe provides you with protection and allows you to exist here as if you were one of us. The Deep Ones do not tolerate barriers, even unintended ones. You must present yourself fully when the time comes." The words sent a shiver through Mikhail. As the glowing pathway stretched out before him, his awe was tempered by a growing sense of apprehension. Whatever lay ahead, he knew this was only the beginning. Chapter 7, The Dark. Mikhail's feet moved almost automatically, trailing behind the envoys as they guided him through the sprawling underwater city. He had never traveled before, not really. His entire life had been confined to the carefully controlled and curated environment of his family's home. The world beyond those walls had always been an abstract concept, something distant and untouchable. Now, as he walked through the strange and alien halls of the Deep One city, he felt like an intruder in a dream. The architecture was alien in every sense of the word. The smooth, organic curves of the walls and structures bore no resemblance to the angular, functional design of his home. Bioluminescent glyphs pulsed faintly, their patterns shifting as if alive. Strange machines, if they could even be called that, hummed softly, their purpose indecipherable to Mikhail. He caught glimpses of flowing, jelly-like forms encased within transparent spheres, their movements deliberate but incomprehensible. Everything about the city seemed to defy logic, as though it operated on principles beyond his understanding. The air, or rather, the water, seemed heavy with an unspoken tension, the weight of countless secrets pressing down on him. He tried to focus on the figures ahead of him, their fluid movements both graceful and unsettling. There was something about them, an air of quiet reverence that bordered on fanaticism. They walked in synchronized steps, their glowing dust shifting like liquid in the dim light. Mikhail couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, not just by the envoys, but by the city itself. The glowing glyphs seemed to flicker as he passed, their patterns shifting subtly as though they were reacting to his presence. The deeper they traveled, the more unsettling the environment became. The soft, ambient light that had illuminated the outer city began to fade, replaced by an eerie dimness. The structures around them grew darker and more organic, their surfaces resembling the texture of living coral or flesh. Tendrils of bioluminescent moss draped over archways and spiraled down walls, their faint glow casting strange shadows that seemed to writhe and shift in the water. Mikhail's attention was drawn to the small creatures that began to appear as they ventured deeper into the city. Tiny black squids, no larger than his hand, drifted lazily through the water, their movements hypnotic. Their sleek bodies shimmered faintly, their dark forms contrasting sharply against the dim light of the city. Despite their ominous appearance, Mikhail found them oddly charming. One of the squids floated closer to him, its movements almost playful as it darted around his head. Before he could react, it settled gently on his shoulder, its tiny tentacles curling lightly around his robe. "Hey there," Mikhail murmured, his voice soft and uncertain. The squid blinked at him with its round, glossy eyes, its tiny body pulsating faintly. He couldn't help but smile. There was something endearing about the little creature. The reaction from the envoys, however, was immediate and startling. They halted in unison, their glowing dust cools rippling as they turned to stare at Mikhail and his new companion. For a moment, the water seemed to still, the silence heavy and charged. Then, without a word, the envoys resumed their march, but they gave Mikhail a wide berth, their movements stiff and deliberate. The atmosphere grew even more tense, the weight of their unease pressing heavily on him. The journey continued in silence, the path ahead growing darker and more foreboding with each step. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, seeming to cling to the walls and floors like living things. The faint, ambient light that had guided them thus far diminished until it was little more than a dim haze, leaving the space bathed in a deep, oppressive gloom. The structures around them seemed less like buildings and more like the skeletons of ancient, colossal creatures, their organic forms twisted and warped by time. Tendrils of bioluminescent moss hung from the walls, their faint glow flickering erratically, as if struggling against an unseen force. Eventually, they arrived at a vast, open chamber dominated by a deep, black pool at its center. The pool exuded an eerie, magnetic presence, its surface unnervingly still and so dark it seemed to drink in the surrounding light. The water emitted a faint, almost imperceptible hum, a low vibration that resonated in Mikhail's chest and set his teeth on edge. The air, or the water, grew heavier here, as though the very atmosphere was saturated with the weight of something ancient and unknowable. Every instinct in Mikhail's body screamed at him to turn back, but the envoys remained silent, their glowing robes casting faint, ethereal ripples across the black expanse. One of the envoys stepped forward, their voice echoing faintly through the chamber. "You are expected." Mikhail stared at the pool, his heart pounding in his chest. "Ah. You want me to go in there?" he asked, his voice tinged with a mix of disbelief and fear. The envoy didn't respond. Instead, they raised a hand and gestured toward the pool. The message was clear. "This is terrifying," Mikhail muttered under his breath. He took a hesitant step forward, his gaze fixed on the inky blackness of the water. He could feel his courage faltering, his resolve slipping away. Just as he was about to voice another protest, one of the envoys moved swiftly behind him and gave him a firm push. With a startled yelp, Mikhail tumbled into the pool. The cold water enveloped him instantly, its icy grip sending a shock through his body. He flailed instinctively, his arms and legs moving against the thick, viscous water as he sank deeper and deeper. The darkness was absolute, a suffocating void that seemed to press in on him from all sides. He couldn't tell which way was up or down, his sense of direction completely lost. He didn't know how long he fell. Seconds? Minutes? Time seemed to stretch and warp in the oppressive blackness. Just as he felt the first stirrings of panic clawing at the edges of his mind, faint glimmers of light began to appear around him. They were small at first, tiny pinpricks of red and yellow that pulsed faintly in the distance. Gradually, the lights grew brighter, revealing the outlines of enormous, unblinking eyes. The eyes were everywhere, their gazes fixed on him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. The faint glow from the eyes illuminated the water around him, revealing massive, coiling tentacles that writhed and shifted in the shadows. The sheer scale of the creatures around him was overwhelming, their forms blending into the darkness in ways that made it impossible to tell where one ended and another began. The water was thick and still, its oppressive weight pressing down on him like a living thing. Mikhail's breath came in shallow gasps, his chest tightening with fear. His mind raced, the primal urge to flee warring with the knowledge that there was nowhere to go. Then, without warning, a voice cut through the darkness. It wasn't a sound in the traditional sense, it was as if the very water around him vibrated with intent, carrying the voice directly into his mind. The pressure of the vibrations pulsed through the stagnant blackness, pushing the words into his thoughts like a physical force. The voice was deep and resonant, its tone calm but commanding, each word rippling through the water and resonating in his very bones. Calm yourself, pupa. Where is the resolve that stole the fourth fruit of the maze? The words sent a shock through Mikhail, their weight anchoring him in the moment. He forced himself to breathe, his thoughts coalescing around a single, defiant idea. I am Michael Caine. I am the legend. I will survive this. He clenched his fists, his fear giving way to determination. The monsters around him were vast and unknowable, but they weren't invincible. He wasn't just some pupa trembling in the dark. He was a fighter, a survivor, and he would face whatever came next with his head held high. Slowly, he opened his eyes, meeting the gaze of the massive, unblinking eyes around him. The water pulsed faintly with the glow of the creatures, and in that moment, Mikhail felt the weight of their presence, not just as beings, but as something far greater. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he was ready to face it. Chapter 8, Training begins. The darkness around Mikhail seemed to shift, the glowing red and yellow eyes narrowing as though their unseen owners were appraising him. The stillness of the water became oppressive, wrapping around him like a shroud. The voice returned, each word vibrating through the stagnant depths and into his very being. You are calm now, pupa. Good. Resolve such as yours is rare. Let us see if it is accompanied by truth. Mikhail's fists clenched tighter. He had prepared for this moment as best he could, sticking firmly to the story he'd told his parents. He wouldn't waver now, not when the stakes felt as high as they ever had. I wanted to prove myself, Mikhail said, his voice firm despite the oppressive surroundings. To train. To become strong enough for the GEWF. I treated the maze like my first real match. That's why I pushed through. That's all. The eyes blinked in unison, a rippling wave of light that radiated through the water. The voice responded, calm yet tinged with something deeper, curiosity, perhaps. An answer rehearsed, it mused. But perhaps not false. You are ambitious, Mikhail X'Cen. That much is undeniable. Tell me, do you understand what you are? The question caught Mikhail off guard. He hesitated, unsure how to respond. I'm a Shorebraxian, he said cautiously. A pupa, I guess. I don't really know what you mean. The voice hummed, a low vibration that sent ripples through the water. Then listen, pupa, and learn. Your kind, the Shorebraxians, are an offshoot of us, the deep ones. Long ago, before your people walked the surface of your world, we cultivated the spark of life within your ancestors. You are our legacy, though you have strayed far from our design. Mikhail frowned, trying to process the information. You're saying, you made us? In a manner of speaking, the voice replied. You were not shaped to be as you are now. Time and evolution have altered you. Most Shorebraxians have lost the spark that once bound us. They live simple, orderly lives, content to follow routines and maintain their traditions. But some retain what we call the spark, an ember of ambition and desire, a will to shape the world rather than be shaped by it. The glow of the eyes intensified, their focus sharpening. You, Mikhail X'Cen, possess this spark in abundance. The willpower you displayed in the maze is proof of that. Few could have achieved what you did. Fewer still would have done so with such determination. It is remarkable. Mikhail swallowed hard, unsure whether to feel flattered or unnerved. I just wanted to win, he said quietly. To prove I could do it. And that is why you are here, the voice said. Ambition is rare among your kind, but it is not unheard of. Throughout the galaxy, such willpower is the mark of those who rise above. It is the foundation of greatness, and in the Galactic Empire Wrestling Federation, greatness is more than mere spectacle. The mention of the GEWF sent a jolt of excitement through Mikhail. You know about the GEWF? he asked, his voice rising slightly despite himself. The voice chuckled, a low, resonant sound that reverberated through the water. Know about it? We understand it more deeply than you can imagine. The GEWF is not just entertainment, pupa. It is hyperreal. A stage, yes, but also a battlefield. A method of galactic management. Political and criminal. It has replaced war itself, a ritualized method for planets and governments to assert dominance and resolve disputes. The greater the champion, the more power they bring to their homeworld. Mikhail's mind reeled. He had always thought of the GEWF as the pinnacle of sports, the ultimate test of strength and skill. To hear it described as a mechanism for galactic control was almost too much to comprehend. So it's like a war? He asked. But with wrestling? In essence, the voice replied. And you, Mikhail X'Cen, have the potential to be more than a participant. You could be a legend. We, the Deep Ones, seek to cultivate such legends from among your kind. It is why we created the cube you cherish, why we continue to guide those who show promise. And it is why we have brought you here. Mikhail's breath caught. What do you mean? The eyes glowed brighter, their gaze unwavering. We will sponsor you, pupa. Your journey to the GEWF will not end here. You will travel to Slamdara Prime, the poster planet of the Federation. There, you will compete in the most prestigious scholarship tournament in the galaxy. The victor earns entry to Grapplepolis, the capital of the GEWF and home to the Pinnacle Dome, the most illustrious academy for aspiring champions. Mikhail's heart raced. Slamdara Prime. Grapplepolis. The Pinnacle Dome. It was everything he had dreamed of and more. But the voice wasn't finished. We cannot ensure your place in the academy, it said. That will depend on you. But we can ensure that you are prepared. Over the next 3 years, you will train in the martial secrets of the Deep Ones. The arts of Cosmic Dark Grappling. When you emerge from your pupation, you will be larger, stronger, and ready to prove yourself. Until then, your life will be devoted to training. Discipline will be your religion, and the GEWF your altar. Mikhail's excitement was tempered by the weight of the words. 3 years of training. 3 years of relentless preparation. It was daunting, but he felt the spark within him burn brighter. This was his chance. His path. I won't let you down, he said, his voice steady. The voice chuckled again, a deep, resonant sound. See that you do not, pupa. The galaxy will be watching. The eyes dimmed, and the water around Mikhail began to shift. He felt himself rising, the darkness giving way to light. As he emerged from the pool, gasping for air, he knew that his life had changed forever. The path to the GEWF had begun, and he would stop at nothing to walk it. If the regimen of the Shorebraxians on the surface was strict, this new Deep One routine was a prison. Gone were the days of sneaking in matches on the holoscreen or playing idly on the cube. Weeks blurred into a single, endless routine of rigorous training and mental discipline. Mikhail's every waking moment was devoted to learning the fluid movements required to unlock his deeper potential. The training felt otherworldly, as if the water itself conspired to mold him into something more. The Deep Ones taught techniques that were as much about harnessing his mind as they were about refining his body. Each motion flowed into the next with a deliberate grace, slow and methodical, like a high-tech Tai Chi reimagined for the weightless depths of the ocean. Every gesture demanded precision. A turn of the wrist or a shift of the hips could alter the water's resistance, transforming the effort into a perfect harmony of strength and fluidity. The water became both adversary and ally. It pressed against him as he moved, thick and unyielding, but its resistance shaped his form, forcing him to adapt, to flow. When he extended his arms, it seemed to carry the motion outward in ripples, amplifying his intent. Each session left his muscles aching, his lungs heaving, but with each repetition, his movements became smoother, more intuitive, as though he were learning a forgotten language spoken only by the currents. At times, the sessions became surreal, almost meditative. The Deep Ones would weave through the water around him, their movements impossibly fluid, their glowing robes trailing like living tendrils. Their silence was profound, an unspoken demand for focus. Mikhail mimicked their actions as best he could, his arms slicing through the water in arcs that felt both alien and natural. His mind emptied of thought, his awareness narrowing to the rhythm of his body and the ebb and flow of the water around him. There were moments when the training took on an almost mystical quality. The water itself seemed alive, responding to his motions in ways he couldn't fully understand. Tiny bioluminescent organisms swirled around him, drawn to the energy of his movements. They illuminated his path, casting ghostly trails of light that lingered in his wake. In those moments, he felt connected to the vastness of the ocean, as though he were part of something far greater than himself. Yet, the training was relentless. The Deep Ones demanded perfection, correcting him with subtle gestures or a faint hum that vibrated through the water whenever he faltered. Each correction was a lesson, not just in technique but in discipline. The smallest mistake rippled outward, disrupting the balance of the entire exercise. And Mikhail was not alone in this journey. The tiny black squids, which he had initially found endearing, became an integral part of the training. These creatures, with their shimmering, inky bodies and curious eyes, darted around the trainees like silent sentinels. They weren't merely onlookers, they practiced alongside the Deep Ones, their movements eerily precise and synchronized. Their small, delicate tentacles moved with an almost supernatural grace, weaving patterns through the water that mirrored the larger, more deliberate gestures of their mentors. One day, during a particularly grueling session, Mikhail asked one of the silent trainees about the squids. The figure's bioluminescent dust cloak shifted as they turned, their voice soft yet firm. "They are not mere creatures," the trainee explained. "They are young Deep Ones, learning as you are. Their form now is but the beginning. They practice to grow, just as you do." The revelation sent a shiver down Mikhail's spine. These small, seemingly harmless creatures were destined to become the very beings guiding his training. It gave their presence a weight he hadn't felt before, and he couldn't help but watch them more closely. Their movements were fluid and deliberate, their small forms gliding through the water with an elegance that belied their size. As they darted around him, their tentacles brushing against his skin, Mikhail felt both awe and a strange camaraderie. They, too, were forging their paths, growing into something greater.
Chapter 9, The Fractals and the Flood. The weeks dragged like currents trapped beneath layers of tectonic pressure. Mikhail X'Cen, once electrified with the thrill of destiny, now found himself swallowed by the quiet grind of Deep One life. The early excitement of being something special, the pupa who passed the fourth fruit maze, the spark-bearer spoken of in hushed currents, had dulled into the bleak gray ritualism of daily training. Even his Shorebraxian physiology, enhanced and maturing under pressure, grew restless beneath the weight of order. He had become one of them, in all the ways that mattered. Not truly a Deep One, but molded in their image, silent, severe, flowing like purpose incarnate through the dark waters of discipline. Had he been watching this unfold as Michael, Earth-born wrestling superfan with a third-gen hand-me-down couch and a diet of cable TV and daydreams, he might have laughed. He would have drawn a line from the monk-like silence of the Deep One trainers to the documentaries he used to binge on Shaolin monks. It was uncanny. All they needed were bald heads, saffron robes, and a camera crew to narrate in a soothing baritone about inner stillness and transcendent form. But now he was inside it. Living it. Each morning began in pitch-black silence, the cool water still and motionless around his chamber. Then, like breath returning to a body, a harmonic frequency would awaken the chamber, drawing him into formation with the other trainees. There were no greetings. No encouragements. Just the slow, deliberate flow of cosmic grappling forms, each one a fluid war dance composed of spirals, strikes, and evasions taught without words and corrected without delay. And yet, his muscles sang. His forearms no longer flailed in wild directions as they once had. The deep bends of Shorebraxian joints moved through the water with a grace that surprised him, each motion informed not just by will but by a growing instinct, as though something ancient was rising through his bloodstream. He didn't need to think about which pose came next. It was like dancing to a rhythm that didn't beat in his ears, but in the soul. But it was the scrolls that changed everything. Ancient kelp press documents, neither paper nor data, but grown, inked, and stored in biochemical resin. Each was a living thing, of sorts, barely perceptible until the reader aligned their breath with the glyphs. Only then would the scroll shimmer to life, revealing diagrams that weren't diagrams at all, but configurations. Arrays. Formations. Patterns of influence and momentum. They weren't meant to be understood with the mind alone. At first, Mikhail thought they were just cultural relics, esoteric symbols to placate tradition. But as he continued meditating on them, his thoughts would start to wander, and then spiral, and then align. It was on the 14th cycle of uninterrupted scroll study that it happened. He had been tracing one of the glyphs, an impossible spirographic array of water flows, with the motion of his limbs in the empty dark of the meditation chamber. The pattern had no center, no end, and yet it spun. Something within him caught, twisted, released. The water became hot, then cold, then stretched away into silence. Reality shattered like tempered glass. And he fell into a vision. The deep was endless. He floated inside a cavern the size of cities, a cathedral of pressure and forgotten gods. Before him moved a being, tentacled and vast, neither transparent nor opaque, but something in between. The ancient deep one flowed through forms that mirrored his own training, only with a fluidity that transcended motion itself. Around the figure hovered egg clutches, sacrosanct spheres trembling with nascent life. From the edges of the cavern came predators, things without names, crusted in time and hate. They surged. The ancient spun. Arms twisted in fractal defense. Every block was a parable. Every counter was a truth. And Mikhail understood it. He felt the logic of it, the song of limbs through current, each motion a signature of survival. The vision accelerated. The eggs hatched. The young emerged and trained, their bodies echoing the master. The pattern burned into Mikhail's soul, folding into his being like a glyph written on bone. He awoke screaming. He lay on the floor of the training grounds, surrounded by his trainers and several silent Shorebraxian attendants. No one spoke. No one needed to. He had passed the first test. That night, they summoned him again. Not to spar, not to meditate, but to listen. You will be entering seclusion, the robed master said, voice low and saturated with the deep hums of ancient intent. You must consolidate what was burned into you. Mikhail wanted to groan. Seclusion sounded like punishment. Like further restriction. Like no matches. No training. No purpose. Until they showed him the chamber. A circular room. Soundproof. Pressure stabilized. The walls were organic coral tech, self-regulating and glowing faintly with biolight. In the center, a VR rig the likes of which he had never seen, not even in the hollow mags from the GEWF. Sleek, with multi-dimensional interface ports, skin response feedback lattices, and the unmistakable shimmer of full haptic neural immersion. Next to it, a plaque written in both deep speech and Galcom. GEWF Historical Archives, unlimited access. Live matches included. Mikhail forgot how to breathe. He stepped forward like a supplicant. His fingers trembled over the activation console. The deep hum of the pod filled the room as it powered on. The monks left without a word. The coral walls sealed shut behind them. He was alone. Alone with everything he had ever wanted. A full rotation cycle later, Mikhail would still be inside, eyes wide with the shimmer of neural data input, body limp in the reclined embrace of the VR pod. The system pulsed to life, wrapping his senses in the rich tapestry of the GEWF, not just images, but entire worlds. His first full immersion dropped him without warning into a live simulation, and it was nothing like the sterile training of Shorebraxia. One moment he stood blinking in the entry vestibule of the archive, the next, he was in the match, his body wired into the neural feed of one of the wrestlers. He gasped, shocked by the immediacy of it. He wasn't watching anymore, he was the fighter. He flexed, or tried to. The body he occupied was bulkier, taller, more brutal than his own. Every motion was molasses until he surrendered control and let the feed guide him. This wasn't about practice. This was experience. The lights roared. The cage around the ring hissed and shimmered with arcs of blue static. Above the squared circle, a credit case glimmered in a glass titanium box, the double bounty. The match was a sanctioned blood feud, something from the outer systems where legal restrictions were more like vague suggestions. Each fighter had a price on the other's blood, and the credits case suspended over the death ladder was worth 10 times the base reward. If you could get it. The other wrestler approached, 7 feet of scaled plating, wrapped in a combat sarong, dragging a chain covered in sharpened tags. Mikhail tried to react, but the simulation didn't let him act freely. He was only along for the ride. The bell rang. What followed was carnage. Bodies slammed into electrified steel. Sparks flew. Mikhail's vision blurred with every impact, filtered through the eyes of his host, a hulking, orc-like brute with tusks like tarnished iron and skin the color of scorched peat. Each movement was heavy, each breath a rumbling growl from a ribcage made for war. The simulated pain was dulled, like a memory recalled through fog, but present enough to teach. The VR didn't just feed him adrenaline. It poured raw momentum into his nerves. Across the ring, the opponent darted forward with an avian grace, a lean, high-plumed fighter whose wings were folded tightly against their back, talons gleaming beneath wrapped shins. Their movements were impossibly fast, slicing through the static-charged air like a feathered knife. This wasn't brute strength against brute strength. It was the deep crush of tectonic violence versus the scalpel precision of sky-born fury. Mikhail felt the muscles of his host surge, massive arms rising to deflect a spinning kick that cracked like thunder against his forearms. He staggered back, grabbing the ropes, which hissed with electricity. It buzzed into his elbows, a pulse of fire along borrowed sinew. The bird fighter didn't pause. They dove in again, beak mask low, wings fluttering just enough to shift balance mid-air, slamming both heels into the orc host's chest. He hit the mat hard. Mikhail's borrowed body rolled on instinct, each motion driven by the neural feed. He rose and caught the bird's leg on the next pass, hoisting the lighter opponent and spinning them in a brutal tilt-a-whirl backbreaker. The crowd erupted. Alien voices howled, some guttural, others harmonic. His host roared, scenting blood, and launched the chain still wrapped around his arm. It caught the bird's wing, yanking them mid-flight and slamming them shoulder first into the cage wall. Sparks and feathers flew. They were both battered, breathing hard, circling each other now. Then came the grapple. The orc host surged in, catching the bird in a clinch. The feathered fighter twisted mid-hold, slipping out and slamming their beak mask into the orc's brow. Blinding pain. Mikhail felt his head snap back. Blood streamed down tusks. But he was laughing. His host, they, were laughing. The latter waited. The credits case sparkled high above. Mikhail's body stumbled forward, ducked a spinning talon strike, and began to climb. Each rung vibrated, threatening to throw him off balance. The bird was climbing the opposite side. They reached the top at the same time. Punch. Talon. Elbow. Headbutt. The orc caught the bird's wrist and smashed their knuckles into the cage strut, then grabbed the case, not to unhook it, but to swing it like a weapon. It connected with the bird fighter's skull. Glass and titanium exploded in a dazzling burst. Credit chips scattered like confetti. The bird plummeted. Mikhail's host collapsed on the platform, hands smoking, eyes fixed on the rain of credits. The match wasn't over. And instead of pressing the advantage, the orc host, ever greedy, ever blunt, began scooping up the scattered credit chips like a war goblin at a loot pile. Mikhail could feel the hunger, the laughable tunnel vision, as they dropped to their knees, scrambling across the blood-slick canvas to snatch handfuls of the shimmering tokens, jamming them into the folds of their gear. It was a tactical mistake. The crowd roared, but their tone shifted. From triumph to warning. The bird was back. Somehow, half staggering, half gliding, rising from the mat like a phantom of vengeance. Their eyes shone with fury, wings spread wide as static crawled across their feathers. The announcer screamed something absurd over the stadium speakers, "I don't believe it. You don't collect credits in the middle of the war." Too late. Mikhail's host looked up just as the bird launched off the second rope in a graceful, wrath-fueled arc, talons outstretched, spinning midair in a corkscrewing double kick that landed squarely into the side of the orc's skull. Everything exploded into white. The orc's body ragdolled against the cage wall, credits spilling like blood from his pouches. The crowd lost its collective mind. Mikhail reeled in borrowed agony, the neural feedback crackling through his bones. This was the GEWF. Ruthless, theatrical, and utterly unforgiving. The bird fighter didn't just recover, they adapted. They used the ring like a weaponized environment, vaulting from turnbuckles and springing off the ropes like the arena itself was a partner in vengeance. Mikhail could feel the panic rising in his orc host's chest, the momentary high of greed turning to a desperate scramble to regain footing. The orc staggered back from a brutal dive kick that rebounded off the corner post and spun the bird through the air into a rolling follow-up knee. The cage crackled behind them, live wires humming with menace as the orc slammed into the mesh and bounced off, disoriented. Incoming from the skyline. One commentator howled, as the bird used a camera rig suspended above the ring to somersault down onto the orc host's back. "I think that was a violation of Sub-Airspace Clause 43. The other chimed in, breathless. "But who cares? That orc's got scrambled credits for brains." Mikhail felt each blow like a distant storm in his bones. The orc rose, reeling, only to be flung with a flawless hip toss into the scaffolding base of the electrified ladder. Sparks leapt. Something sizzled in his gut. The bird raised a wing to the crowd, who responded with an unholy roar. The lights pulsed. The voltage grid glowed. And the bird sprinted full speed, leapt from the middle rope, ricocheted off the inner wall of the cage, and came crashing down with a spinning moonsault that detonated like a comet. The impact sent both fighters flying, tumbling across the mat like discarded dolls. "Mother of mayhem," bellowed the commentator. "That wasn't a move. That was an orbital dropkick." Mikhail, deep inside the orc's psyche, realized something awful: they were losing. And it was beautiful. But the orc wasn't done. Something ancient stirred. A growl echoed, not from the throat, but from the marrow. Rage, coiled like a fuse inside a furnace, snapped and detonated. Mikhail felt the shift as clearly as if it were his own heartbeat. The blood turned hotter, the pulse heavier. His host's green skin deepened, veins swelling with lava-red force. The crowd roared again, not in warning or concern, but recognition. "He's glowing. He's glowing. That's an orc rage." One commentator screamed. "Oh yeah," the other replied. "Buckle up. They always go red before they go down. Berserker mode. The racial passive. A tide of fury that replaced reason with momentum. Mikhail's host surged upright with an inhuman howl, catching the bird mid-charge with a thunderous shoulder. The avian fighter went flailing backward. Talons skidded. Wings caught nothing. And before they could recover, the orc had closed the distance. Grapple. The moment their limbs locked, it was clear. The orc's frame was built for this. Every ounce of feathered elegance was wasted here. The avian tried to twist free, flapping to create space, but the orc adjusted, legs planted wide, hips dropped low, arms like iron knots around the smaller fighter's waist. Mikhail could feel it building. The pressure. The inevitability. He remembered the Deep One forms, how they'd taught him to feel the moment of shift, of balance surrendering to strength. This wasn't grace. This was raw gravitational certainty. The crowd surged again, climbing into frenzied anticipation. If he lands the slam, the commentator whispered, we might see a lights-out finish right here in the cage. Mikhail braced. The bird squirmed. But the orc grinned wide, tusks bared, blood leaking from his brow. This was his element. And in this moment, Mikhail wasn't a pupa or a student. He was a fighter. As the orc host planted his feet and prepared to lift, the bird fighter twisted. One wing folded, one leg drove downward, dirty, desperate, brilliant. The motion jammed the orc's footing, just enough to unbalance the slam. Instead of crashing down in triumph, both fighters tumbled sideways, tangled like dying stars. They hit the electrified mat at the same moment. Sparks. Smoke. Screams. Then silence. The arena lights flickered. The crowd gasped as the scoreboard glitched, stuttered, and displayed the result. Double knockout. It was the 127th in blood feud history. The VR feed went black. Mikhail was yanked from the orc's body like a fish from deep water. He gasped in the pod, sweat cold across his neck, his limbs twitching involuntarily as the system disengaged. Then came the cascade, screens upon screens flashing before his eyes. Stats, metrics, feedback loops, endurance breakdowns. Damage received. Damage dealt. Momentum maps. Viewer reactions. Grapple efficiency. Neural spike patterns. It was everything. He had only been inside one match. And he was already obsessed. Chapter 10, Nodes of the Spark. The days flowed like sediment-heavy current. Mikhail X'Cen remained submerged in his chamber of seclusion, though the training had shifted from brutal choreography of limbs to the subtler agony of thought. Time had ceased to move in discrete blocks, it stretched, slowed, pooled. He was alone, but not adrift. The VR rig, once his sole obsession, had been dimmed. He'd begun to understand why the Deep Ones pulled their chosen from the drowning chorus of the galaxy. Seclusion was not isolation. It was refinement. In that hush, with nothing but the bioluminescent coral glow and the texture of his own breath, he found purchase again in the scrolls. The first manual, the one that had unlocked his vision, lay open in a field of flowing reef light. Its fractals were clear to him now. The lines, once abstract, now sang of meaning. Motion became memory. Muscle learned by imitation what mind had once resisted. His forearms no longer struggled to trace the glyphs in water. They flowed through the forms as if called home. Each scroll in the first manual represented one of the Deep One's limbs, 4 primary, 6 secondary, 4 stabilizers, 14 in all. Each scroll was a geometry of movement and force, an axis of intent rotating around something primal and unknowable. He had mastered the first, tasted the second, and breathed the third. By the end of his 10th rotation cycle in seclusion, he had reached the 14th. Not fully understood, but touched. That was enough. The muscle remembered. The muscle became purpose. When they came for him, the monks bore expressions that blended amusement with concern. Their silence was expected, but one reached out and lightly tapped Mikhail's shoulder, signing the end of his seclusion. He stood, confused. No ritual. No announcement. Simply, it was done. They guided him back to the deeper training halls. He'd expected ceremony or further guidance, but instead, a robed Deep One, marked with the triple-banded spirals of a senior formkeeper, told him plainly, "You have completed your first fractal. Do not expect to complete the second. It will take you months. Years, maybe." Mikhail nodded, lips flat, eyes quiet. Inside, however, his blood was already boiling. It wasn't rebellion. It was curiosity. The spark, as they called it, whatever strand of genetic mad wiring the Deep Ones revered, was burning too bright to be told to wait. He couldn't help himself. The second volume called to him. It radiated complexity. Where the first had been a seed, this was a blooming madness of spirals within spirals. Lines that folded space inside the scrolls. Glyphs that shifted if one looked away. Instructions nested within riddles, and worse, poems. Poems written in the deep speech. He could barely hear the language, let alone think in it. Every time he tried to recite the lines, his mind fogged. The symbols looped back on themselves, refusing to hold meaning. His head throbbed. His gills tightened. And yet he returned to the scrolls. He developed a system. First, memorize short verses. Break them into rhythm. Chant them while training, like mantras layered over form. Second, fragment the fractals. Instead of attempting to read the whole, he traced minute patterns, committing them to muscular memory like calligraphy with the body. Third, isolate the pain. He learned that the mental pressure was like lifting weights, grit behind the eyes, a burning behind the skull. But it built something. Day after day, line after line, the poems and fractals slowly clicked. Until one night, during a long-form sequence in his chamber, it happened. It began as a tremor beneath the thoughts, like an itch on the surface of his soul. Then a spiral formed in his vision, not seen, but known. The water around him slowed. The glyphs in his mind layered. And then, a burst. It wasn't a vision this time. It was a knowing. His body froze. Not paralyzed, but in alignment. Like every atom had snapped into sequence. His heart slowed. His breath thinned. Inside his chest, something ignited, not fire, not light, but a lattice. Nodes. They shimmered into awareness across his consciousness, like stars blooming in a void. Not all at once, not overwhelming, but possible. The first ring of potential. Basic. Fundamental. But real. Chi. Intellect. Strength. Dexterity. Vitality. Charisma. Race. Soul. He felt them as lights behind curtains, vague silhouettes of something vast and unshaped, humming with potential. He could not see the structure of each, but he knew they waited, like ancient gates sealed with purpose. His breath hitched. These were the anchors of cultivation. Not metaphors. Mechanisms. The scroll whispered what no deep one would speak aloud. The system existed beneath the surface teachings, a buried lattice of cultivation nodes, each aligned to a conceptual core, the Tao of self refined into vectors of power. Chi was the breath of existence, the flow of all motion, and its node governed momentum, pressure, and spiritual flow. Intellect, the node of knowing and anticipation, channeled clarity through cognition, unlocking foresight, calculation, and mental resilience. Strength embodied force, not just of muscle but of pressure application, of gravity's denial. Dexterity controlled refinement, the minute control of flow, redirection, and balance. Vitality was a bedrock, reinforcing the body's durability and regulating energy retention. Charisma functioned through resonance, social force and psychic presence, extending influence through the harmonics of one's soul. Race was different. It was the locus of bloodline memory, the genetic script written by eons of submerged struggle. It allowed transformation through understanding, not mutation but refinement of origin. And lastly, soul, distant, faint, yet present. The soul node pulsed quietly, a silent gate, untouched but aware. It was the deepest of them, and the most mysterious. The manual only hinted at it with fractal inversions and mirrored glyphs, as if it were not to be read, only encountered. Each node, the scroll implied, was cultivated through understanding, not by brute force, but by refinement of concept. The Tao of the node had to be not only performed but internalized, each forming a pressure valve in the architecture of one's spirit. Cultivation was not gaining power. It was realizing the powers that were always buried inside. And now, one by one, his nodes were lighting. Weakly. Flickering. But undeniably there. He had passed the second threshold. Mikhail X'Cen, pupa of Shorebraxian, had kindled his spark into form. He collapsed onto the reef bed, arms wide, eyes bright with tears of clarity. No one witnessed the moment. No one needed to. The chamber itself hummed in response. The kelp scroll fluttered, reacting to the flow of his breath. The days flowed like sediment-heavy current. Mikhail X'Cen remained submerged in his chamber of seclusion, though the training had shifted from brutal choreography of limbs to the subtler agony of thought. Time had ceased to move in discrete blocks, it stretched, slowed, pooled. He was alone, but not adrift. The VR rig, once his sole obsession, had been dimmed. He'd begun to understand why the Deep Ones pulled their chosen from the drowning chorus of the galaxy. Seclusion was not isolation. It was refinement. In that hush, with nothing but the bioluminescent coral glow and the texture of his own breath, he found purchase again in the scrolls. The first manual, the one that had unlocked his vision, lay open in a field of flowing reef light. Its fractals were clear to him now. The lines, once abstract, now sang of meaning. Motion became memory. Muscle learned by imitation what mind had once resisted. His forearms no longer struggled to trace the glyphs in water. They flowed through the forms as if called home. Each scroll in the first manual represented one of the Deep One's limbs, 4 primary, 6 secondary, 4 stabilizers, 14 in all. Each scroll was a geometry of movement and force, an axis of intent rotating around something primal and unknowable. He had mastered the first, tasted the second, and breathed the third. By the end of his 10th rotation cycle in seclusion, he had reached the 14th. Not fully understood, but touched. That was enough. The muscle remembered. The muscle became purpose. When they came for him, the monks bore expressions that blended amusement with concern. Their silence was expected, but one reached out and lightly tapped Mikhail's shoulder, signing the end of his seclusion. He stood, confused. No ritual. No announcement. Simply, it was done. They guided him back to the deeper training halls. He'd expected ceremony or further guidance, but instead, a robed Deep One, marked with the triple-banded spirals of a senior form keeper, told him plainly, "You have completed your first fractal. Do not expect to complete the second. It will take you months. Years, maybe." Mikhail nodded, lips flat, eyes quiet. Inside, however, his blood was already boiling. It wasn't rebellion. It was curiosity. The spark, as they called it, whatever strand of genetic mad wiring the Deep Ones revered, was burning too bright to be told to wait. He couldn't help himself. The second volume called to him. It radiated complexity. Where the first had been a seed, this was a blooming madness of spirals within spirals. Lines that folded space inside the scrolls. Glyphs that shifted if one looked away. Instructions nested within riddles, and worse, poems. Poems written in the deep speech. He could barely hear the language, let alone think in it. Every time he tried to recite the lines, his mind fogged. The symbols looped back on themselves, refusing to hold meaning. His head throbbed. His gills tightened. And yet he returned to the scrolls. He developed a system. First, memorize short verses. Break them into rhythm. Chant them while training, like mantras layered over form. Second, fragment the fractals. Instead of attempting to read the whole, he traced minute patterns, committing them to muscular memory like calligraphy with the body. Third, isolate the pain. He learned that the mental pressure was like lifting weights, grit behind the eyes, a burning behind the skull. But it built something. Day after day, line after line, the poems and fractals slowly clicked. Until one night, during a long-form sequence in his chamber, it happened. It began as a tremor beneath the thoughts, like an itch on the surface of his soul. Then a spiral formed in his vision, not seen, but known. The water around him slowed. The glyphs in his mind layered. And then, a burst. It wasn't a vision this time. It was a knowing. His body froze. Not paralyzed, but in alignment. Like every atom had snapped into sequence. His heart slowed. His breath thinned. Inside his chest, something ignited, not fire, not light, but a lattice. Nodes. They shimmered into awareness across his consciousness, like stars blooming in a void. Not all at once, not overwhelming, but possible. The first ring of potential. Basic. Fundamental. But real. Chi. Intellect. Strength. Dexterity. Vitality. Charisma. Race. Soul. He felt them as lights behind curtains, vague silhouettes of something vast and unshaped, humming with potential. He could not see the structure of each, but he knew they waited, like ancient gates sealed with purpose. His breath hitched. These were the anchors of cultivation. Not metaphors. Mechanisms. The scroll whispered what no Deep One would speak aloud. The system existed beneath the surface teachings, a buried lattice of cultivation nodes, each aligned to a conceptual core, the Tao of self refined into vectors of power. Chi was the breath of existence, the flow of all motion, and its node governed momentum, pressure, and spiritual flow. Intellect, the node of knowing and anticipation, channeled clarity through cognition, unlocking foresight, calculation, and mental resilience. Strength embodied force, not just of muscle but of pressure application, of gravity's denial. Dexterity controlled refinement, the minute control of flow, redirection, and balance. Vitality was a bedrock, reinforcing the body's durability and regulating energy retention. Charisma functioned through resonance, social force and psychic presence, extending influence through the harmonics of one's soul. Race was different. It was the locus of bloodline memory, the genetic script written by eons of submerged struggle. It allowed transformation through understanding, not mutation but refinement of origin. And lastly, soul, distant, faint, yet present. The soul node pulsed quietly, a silent gate, untouched but aware. It was the deepest of them, and the most mysterious. The manual only hinted at it with fractal inversions and mirrored glyphs, as if it were not to be read, only encountered. Each node, the scroll implied, was cultivated through understanding, not by brute force, but by refinement of concept. The Tao of the node had to be not only performed but internalized, each forming a pressure valve in the architecture of one's spirit. Cultivation was not gaining power. It was realizing the powers that were always buried inside. And now, one by one, his nodes were lighting. Weakly. Flickering. But undeniably there. He had passed the second threshold. Mikhail X'Cen, pupa of Shorebraxia, had kindled his spark into form. He collapsed onto the reef bed, arms wide, eyes bright with tears of clarity. No one witnessed the moment. No one needed to. The chamber itself hummed in response. The kelp scroll fluttered, reacting to the flows of his breath. When they found him, the attendants were silent. Not out of disrespect, but a strange reverence. The faceless servants of the deep ones, robed, limbless, moving with the liquid grace of creatures shaped more by water than land, watched him with stillness that felt more like awe than concern. His rapid progress should have been celebrated. Instead, they treated him like a plant that had grown too quickly, at risk of snapping under its own weight. They told him gently, almost pityingly, that his advancement in mere weeks was not something the manuals intended. Shorebraxians, they reminded him, were not suited for awakening the deep genetic resonance of the node lattice. Not without long periods of bodily transformation, spiritual filtering, and neural pruning. These things took time, cycles, even decades. What he had done was not impossible, but unnatural. To awaken the nodes so soon was rare. Dangerous, even. Not because he would die, but because he might lose himself. They asked him, quietly, how he had done it. Mikhail hesitated. He couldn't speak of Earth, not here, not to them. Instead, he offered the truth filtered through a mission. I trained like the GEWF demanded. I needed the strength. I treated it like my first match. I had to win. The servants nodded slowly. It wasn't the full answer, but it was one they accepted. Still, concern hung in the water like sediment. They touched his forehead, checked his pulse in 4 places, and examined the subtle pulsing glow that now emanated from under his skin. There was consensus, he would return to the VR seclusion. It was both punishment and reward. A test and a refuge. He would spend another month locked into simulated matches, but not merely for study. It was containment. The nodes, now stirred to life, had to stabilize. Their glow had to set. So Mikhail went back into the deep stillness, but this time, with something alive inside him. The second round of seclusion was not the radiant cocoon Mikhail had imagined. It felt heavier now. Duller, maybe. The first time, the VR chamber had been a revelation, pure discovery, pulsing with possibility. Now, it was work. The thrill hadn't vanished entirely. He still looked forward to the sensation of shunting into another being, the theater of blood and roar and the thousands of alien minds watching through the neural feed. But something else gnawed at him, something deeper and nearer to the bone. The nodes. Ever since that second breakthrough, they flickered in his awareness like storm lanterns on the edge of consciousness. Not painful, but present. Like a sore in the mouth, an itch between the ribs. His attention drifted toward them constantly, and the more he tried to focus on the arena, the more he felt their low electric hum resonating with his thoughts. They pulsed during meals. They pulsed during sleep. They pulsed during the training void of his dreams. He reached out for them often, not physically but spiritually, some dim instinct guiding him into the inward space he was only just beginning to understand. There they were, the constellation of Chi, the core of strength, the whisper of soul, dim, flickering, but unmistakable. Like lights buried under water, shifting with each of his breaths. The scrolls had said nothing about the sensation, only what the nodes meant. But Mikhail was beginning to learn that cultivation was as much personal intuition as dogma. It wasn't until the 4th day in the chamber that he felt stable enough to slip back into the chair. The VR rig activated with its soft, rising pitch, and the pod's gel cradled him like a womb of cold potential. His mind settled. His eyes closed. His breath evened. This time, he did not rush. No leap into live combat. No blind lottery into galactic slaughter. Instead, he drifted through the massive catalog of upcoming matches, hundreds of channels branching through time and space. Each one a broadcast neural conduit, a ticket to another body, another war. He had learned to filter now. The first time had been desperation and instinct. Now he was a disciple of form. He scrolled carefully. He looked for style. Weight class. Neural compatibility. Meta trends. The GEWF was more than a death sport, it was a puzzle. A battle space where rules twisted like holographic steel. Tactics rose and fell in waves. Every season had its champions and its broken builds. And Mikhail, always the fanboy, now looked at them with new eyes. Metagaming was a recognized phenomenon. The meta, short for most effective tactics available, was not just tolerated but celebrated, studied. Fighters who adhered to it weren't cheaters. They were frontrunners. Innovators. The entire galactic sphere watched them, learned from them, and emulated their systems. Some used it to great effect, weaponizing form cycles, chaining passive skills with racial traits until combat became poetry in motion. Others pushed its limits into absurdity. Mitosis. It had begun as a niche racial trait, found in slime-based species, oozes, and cellular hive minds. But when the blob rose through the Zygote Crucible tournament last year, the rulebooks trembled. Its ability to replicate during a match effectively created an army of itself, breaking the no allies clause in the rule charter. But due to a loophole, genetic continuity, the appeals board had ruled it legal, if rare. After all, what was an ally if it was still you? The result, a paradigm shift. And now Mikhail was about to step into the ring against it. The match was labeled a Tier 3 bounty grudge bout, Caine the Disciple versus the Blob. Caine was a loxodon, massive, tusked, six-limbed, hide thick as battleship plating. A pugilist monk from the desert world of Vadritha, known for his traditional formwork and rigid discipline. A throwback. A tactical underdog. Perfect. The shunt snapped in. The world blinked sideways, and Mikhail was inside. The smell of chalk and blood. The pressure in the knuckles. The weight of the crowd, not on his skin but in his chest, vibrating through the bones like a tribal drum. He had become Caine, and he was Caine. But something new waited in the bloodstream. 5 nodes. Not his own. Faint but functional. Dimmer than his, but steadier. There was no soul here. No charisma. Just 5 burning cores, strength, vitality, dexterity, chi, and race. And they glowed. The match hadn't started yet, but Mikhail could feel them. This was Caine's Tao. His lattice of being. No frills. No tricks. A fortress built of stone and silence. A proper pugilist. The scrolls in Mikhail's own body buzzed in resonance. He smiled. Across the cage, the blob waited. It was enormous. Like a cauldron of acidic soup wrapped in trauma gel. Translucent green, riddled with slow twitching muscle cords and dull organelles. Occasionally, something inside it shifted, like a limb that forgot it wasn't separate anymore. It pulsed. It shimmered. It laughed, somehow, bubbling from all sides. The ring announcer screeched over the feed, "Welcome, warriors of the wire. To this Tier 3 blood grudge match, we bring you a classic clash of fists and folds. Will the mighty monk overcome the monstrous mitosis? Let's find out." The bell rang. Mikhail tensed in Caine's stance. The nodes ignited. Above the cage, hovering drones broadcast the spectacle to trillions. The announcers, 2 veteran voices of the GEWF, filled the arena feed with practiced zeal. For those tuning in late, this is a Tier 3 blood grudge match under Warrior of the Wire regulations. That means no disqualifications, full combat immersion, and a bounty multiplier depending on terminal damage dealt. Each fighter has agreed to neural-anchored stakes. In plain speech, they fight until one of them can't get up. "Exactly, Korik," said the second voice, more nasal, tinged with glee. These blood grudges started in the wire cages of old Shardmore, back when diplomacy was a steel chair and a reinforced spine. This is a legacy format, folks, part ceremonial duel, part contract settlement, and all brutality. Down in the cage, the tension snapped taut. The floor beneath Caine shimmered, electricity pulsing faintly through the thin filigree of glowing circuit carved into the ring's base, amplification tech, old and finicky. But working. The blob burbled in place, its mass trembling with anticipation. Caine stepped left. The blob oozed right. The circling began, slow and deliberate. Caine opened with a jab, a heavy, trunk-thick motion meant to gauge distance. It sank halfway into the blob's surface before being pushed back by a pulsing wave of counterpressure. The blob didn't counterattack immediately. Instead, its membrane rippled, and from within, a second bulge pressed forward, forming a pseudo-limb. It waved mockingly. The crowd howled. A taunt from the blob. The announcer laughed. That's going to cost him when the monk starts cycling that sect discipline. Remember, folks, Caine isn't just brawn. He's trained in the eastern sect of sixfold way of Vajratha. Caine dropped low and swept forward, one leg extending with surprising grace for his size. The blob reacted, but too slowly. The sweep caught its base and disrupted its balance, forcing part of its mass to roll up and over itself. A satisfying splatter echoed through the stadium. And the first hit goes to the disciple. Let's see how long he can keep it up. The blob's known for early replication. And when it splits, things get complicated. The match was on. And Mikhail was ready. Even as Caine's fists moved through the practiced arc of his opening form, Mikhail felt it, his own nodes, dim and distant like lanterns under a black ocean. He wasn't in control, not directly, but when Caine's strength node flared to life, Mikhail's own flickered in resonance. His body, miles and miles away, floating in seclusion, tensed subtly. It was learning. Learning how? This was consolidation, he realized. Through Caine's mastery, his own foundation was absorbing deeper alignments. The scrolls had spoken of this in metaphor, something about singing across water and knowing the shape of the moon by the ripples. Now he understood. But what came next broke even the poetic bounds of ancient kelp scrolls. The blob surged forward, not to strike, but to emit. A low pulse rippled from its surface. Mikhail felt it more than saw it. A pressure wave that didn't move the air, but moved the self. Like vertigo injected through the pores. The sensation slammed into him like a crash of deepwater pressure, fear, claustrophobia, the certainty of being crushed. Caine's body locked for a fraction of a moment, muscles twitching, nerves singing with defensive panic. Some kind of body node suppression, Mikhail realized in horror. The blob was trained. Not just some random sludge splitter, this one had studied. But Caine was no novice. With a grunt, he grounded his feet and brought two of his fists together. The echo rolled through the node lattice, a vibratory clash between strength and vitality. The pressure shattered. The blob reeled. Caine did not. The monk moved forward, throwing a trio of punches with piston-like grace. The blob barely dodged the second. The third landed, viscous matter splattered wide, and the hive mind twitched in surprise. Would you look at that? One announcer cried. The disciples not falling for the classic mitotic haze. Most rookies would be flat by now. He broke the body pressure field with a resonance clap, the other replied. Are we sure Caine hasn't been training with the sound cults? The announcer chuckled. The crowd, a multi-species roar of voices across 1,000 systems, erupted. The blob was on the back foot. But not for long. As the announcers had all but predicted, the moment danger truly reared its head, the blob responded with its signature maneuver. With a tremble, a shudder, and a sickening slurp, it began to split. The crowd gasped. Mitosis wasn't just spectacle, it was strategy. And now it was happening. The green mass pulled itself into 4 parts. At first, they were sluggish, undeveloped, smaller than the main core, but already they pulsed with shared consciousness, rippling with awareness. Caine turned in place, warily tracking the duplication as it accelerated. The new form swelled in size, consistency firming with every breath. Here we go. One announcer roared. The meta has arrived. 4 combatants now, all legally himself. And each one counts as a threat. Caine's surrounded, folks, he's in a grappler's death ring. Mikhail felt it too, not just through the eyes of Caine, but inside his own mind back in seclusion. The nodes responded. Fear lanced through his chi and thudded through his dexterity core. He wasn't just watching the cornering, he felt it. All 4 blob forms emanated that same deepwater-like pressure field, and this time Caine was surrounded. The first blob struck high. The second slid low, attempting a sweep. The third lunged from the side, a mass of jelly fists, and the fourth hung back, undulating ominously. Caine parried one, ducked under another, but the grapple began regardless. 3 on 1. Look at that clinch. That's a cellular wrap. No air in there. Caine's trying to cycle his vitality, but those ooze secretions are disrupting his timing. They're flowing around his stance like they planned this. A chorus of crunches, squelches, and furious bellows echoed through the stadium as Caine slammed an elbow into one, kicked off another, spun, and broke the grip of the third, only to be tackled from behind again. He was fighting for every breath now. And Mikhail, buried deep inside the neural core, was right there with him. He was learning. Through Caine's limbs, Mikhail observed where the formwork succeeded, and where it faltered. If it had been him, really him, inside this body, he would have shifted his footing left, let the grapple come, and flowed with it instead of resisting. It was like trying to fight the tide. Better to guide it, to let the blob overextend, then punish it. The hive mind, despite its multiplicity, Was still one mind stretched too thin. It would make mistakes. Mikhail was sure of it. But the sensation of losing still itched at his gut. Mikhail X'Cen was a disciple of the forms. But Michael Caine, the loudmouthed, ladder-diving backyard legend from Earth, hated to lose. The irony stung. He chuckled to himself, a sharp breath of sarcasm and grit. But the match snapped his attention back. Caine was battered but unbroken, weathering the embrace of slime and sinew. And then it changed. With shocking speed, the fourth blob, until now loitering just outside range, leapt. Not to strike, but to merge. The three grappling blobs surged back into it like green flame pulled into a furnace. The blob became whole once more, larger, reinforced, pulsing with heat and pressure. Recombination maneuver. The announcer shrieked. It's not often we see the full slurp finish. The blob, now a titan of gelatinous mass, slammed Caine back first into the electrified cage wall. Sparks exploded. The loxodon's tusk screeched against the metal. He grunted, staggered, and fell. Caine is down. The blob claims another. The crowd detonated. Sound, color, pulse, it all poured through the neural link like wildfire. And then, like the flick of a switch, Mikhail was alone again. The feed cut to black. And in its place, data. Stats. Pulse rates. Power outputs. Fight assessment overlays. Dozens of flickering holograms reflected on the inside of the pod as the system calculated. Mikhail sat in silence, breath caught between awe and rage. Because even in defeat, especially in defeat, he had learned. And not just about form. Sitting in the darkened stillness of the pod, the VR feed replaced by a storm of post-match metrics, Mikhail felt a strange new hunger take root in his chest. The blob's victory hadn't been luck. It hadn't even been brute force. It was tactics. Codified, institutionalized. Meta. The GEWF had evolved beyond art, it had become architecture, a living structure of advantage layered on advantage. And Mikhail could see it now, more clearly than ever. The mitosis play, once a curiosity, now seemed tempting. He wouldn't be able to use it, not exactly. But that didn't mean he couldn't adapt. Study. Twist the ideas behind it into something that could fit him. Slamdara Prime loomed ahead. The school. Grapplepolis. The Pinnacle Dome. Once he was there, once he wasn't just a pupa anymore, he could learn to weave tactics like this into his own toolkit. Copying wouldn't be beneath him. Victory never was. For the first time, the meta didn't feel like something outside of him. It felt like clay. Something he could mold. And he would. Because Michael Caine wasn't just going to survive the GEWF. He was going to conquer it. Chapter 11, The Pupa Ascends. Time slowed beneath the water. Or perhaps it simply thickened. The way light drifted sluggishly through the vaulted chambers of the deep, the way sound came with a tremble rather than a voice, made everything feel elongated, ritualized. For Mikhail X'Cen, it was a month of silence, solitude, and subtle torment. His second stint in VR had proven productive, though not nearly as potent as the first. Caine the disciple had been an accident of fortune, a perfect alignment between resonance and need. The subsequent neural rides through other fighters, while still educational, carried less weight. The connection wasn't there. They were flashes of firelight on a cave wall, not the sunbeam that had burned through his soul in the first match. But the chamber itself, that liquid tomb in which he floated, meditated, and dreamed, had continued its work. The fractal manuals unfolded in his mind like kelp spores caught in a current. Each time he meditated, the symbols shifted, realigned, gained clarity. He memorized pages by feel, by the rhythm of their glyphs, letting the currents of his thought pass through them like reeds. The forms began to dance inside him, not as steps but as meanings. The node network, his own personal Tao, grew more legible. The chi node was brighter now, stabilized. The strength node had begun to crackle with something deeper than muscle. Soul still eluded him, slippery and strange, flickering in the far distance like a candle seen from beneath a frozen lake. But something else had emerged. A sense of lankiness. Not in body, but in spirit. Like a sprout that had reached for too much sun, too soon. The monks had indeed warned of it, of growth without grounding, of the risks of blooming too rapidly. Mikhail had scoffed at the time. But now he could feel it. He was unstable. Every node throbbed with tension, stretched thin like a membrane about to tear. He couldn't push any further. Not yet. The scrolls didn't just warn against it, they begged caution. The deep ones, in their way, had done the same. And now he understood. He had to consolidate. He had to let his network settle. There was wisdom in the slow path, after all. So Mikhail obeyed the manuals. He continued the forms. He studied the scrolls. He let his hunger for combat simmer rather than boil. He practiced breathing, not just for the body, but for the lattice within. He let his internal rhythm align with the quiet pulse of the deep. And it worked. When the gates to the meditation wing finally peeled open like a bioluminescent anemone, Mikhail stepped forward not as a prisoner released, but as a monk returned from pilgrimage. The city had changed. Or maybe it hadn't. Maybe he had. The waters seemed brighter. The squidlings that drifted near the coral pillars hummed with greater clarity, their movements more fluid, their songs more resonant. The very architecture of the deep, the way stone curved like shells and light refracted like prayer, felt earned now. It was no longer alien. It was a home. The faceless attendants of the deep ones received him in silence. No masks, no gestures, just acknowledgement. He was expected. And so, once more, he descended. Into the abyssal trench. Into the presence of the deep ones. The darkness swallowed him, as it always did. Pressure wrapped him like a cloak. The silence was total, until it wasn't. Vibrations pulsed through the water. A resonance in his chest. The words of the elders, not spoken but implanted, vibrating through his being like drumbeats in bone. You return, Kelpling. A pause. A pulse. You grow. A shiver. Mikhail bowed, not with his body, but with his will. Yes, I have trained, he thought, not as speech, but as offering. I understand now that haste is a poor meal. That the scrolls are not simply patterns, but paths. You sprouted swiftly, the deep ones replied. Too swiftly. A shoot unbound by soil. Mikhail could not argue. But you did not break, they continued. You listened. You grounded. You stayed. The water pulsed with approval. Around him, the dim red and yellow eyes of the deep lords opened in the murk. Tentacles moved like strands of fate. Each one ancient. Each one watching. You have come far, they said. So far that the currents change. Your trajectory bends upward. Toward air. Toward stage. Toward arena. Mikhail's pulse quickened. We have watched. Through your neural flows. Through the bloodsport simulations. We see your intent. We see the legend you strive to become. Another pause. Another pulse. You are a Kelpling. But you are not only a Kelpling. You are more. The darkness deepened. Something ancient stirred in the pressure, as if the sea itself drew breath thinking. You are ready. The words sank into Mikhail like gravity. Ready for what? The tournament. Silence. Then, the booming ripple of confirmation. The spiral of fang and flame. Mikhail's heart thudded. A proving ground. A spiral of challengers drawn from the lesser domes. A test for aspirants to Slamdara Prime. Slamdara. Grapplepolis. The Pinnacle Dome. It had always been a dream. Distant. Unreachable. A stage so grand it eclipsed logic. A temple of wrestling. A galactic cathedral where the greatest warriors of every system collided. This spiral will mark your passage, said the deep ones. You will ascend as a child. You will fight as a barnacle. You will survive as a legend. Or you will not. Mikhail swallowed. He did not hesitate. When? Soon. The word rang with finality. The sea will release you. The currents will carry you to the threshold. There, you will step upon the first rung of your ascent. A final pulse. Do not falter. And then the voices receded. Mikhail rose. He did not rise alone. The nodes within him pulsed, still faint, still unripe, but somewhat aligned. Chi. Strength. Dexterity. Soul. Vitality. The beginnings of path. The echo of the deep. He carried their mark now. Their blessing. Their training. He would carry it into the spiral. He would fight for more than his name. He would fight for the path. For the dream. For the dome. Because Michael Caine wasn't done. He was just getting started. And as he emerged from the trench and was escorted by the attendants of the deep, he quickly remembered that the deep one's understanding of soon did not quite match his own. The schedule presented to him, handed over with reverence by a robed, squid-eyed functionary, was clear. He would be sent off-world to the local sector tournament arena. But not for 4 more months. 3/5 of a Shorebraxian cycle. An eternity in pupil time. Until then, his life would continue as it had, rigid, inward, utterly devout. The deep ones, in their cold aquatic wisdom, had restricted his access to the next manuals. There would be no further epiphanies. No fractals to chase. They had seen the strain in his lattice. They feared what came from overgrowth. Instead, they gave him regimen. Repetition. Consolidation. Flow. And Mikhail obeyed. Not out of resignation, but resolve. He would make this monastic abyss his forge. The endless meditations, the relentless bodywork, the underwater grapples with squiddling spar partners, it was all shaping something greater. He was spawning Mikhail X'Cen anew. And this legend would rise, born of pressure, honed by silence, destined for the roar of the dome. The next 3/5 THS of a Shorebraxian orbital cycle pass not with quiet contemplation, but a rigorous intensity few mortals could withstand. Mikhail's world narrowed to forms, breath, repetition. Gone were the distractions of the cube and the glories of streamed matches. In their place stood ancient routines older than dynasties, perfected by time and pressure and delivered through the stern gills of the Deep One's advisors. He was treated like a young master, the bloom of a rare orchid coaxed into brilliance. Meals became ceremonies of protein and ritual. He dined on spider crab paste fermented in volcanic brine, on thick cords of brain vine from the abyssal shelf, on coral-fed flatfish that glowed faintly as they swam down his throat. Each nutrient was chosen not for pleasure, but for the strengthening of bone, mind, and node. Even his digestion was part of the cultivation. Training began before the tides turned and ended long after bioluminescence had faded from the sky vaults of the deep. Mikhail's limbs grew wiry with fluid power, his strokes in the water sharper, more refined. He practiced atop currents and under them, moving with the sea instead of through it. The kelp scrolls returned, not in new volume, but in deepening familiarity. Each glyph etched into memory. Each movement aligned with breath and pulse. He fought sparring partners both physical and metaphysical. Elder monks of the Deep Ones would engage him in underwater combat, never letting him rely on brute strength alone. Tentacles would bind his limbs, and he'd have to think with his form, respond not with reaction but with foresight. They taught him the tidal delay, the crashing gate, the cephalopod's clinch, all ancient grapples known only to the cosmic clergy. When he wasn't being battered or honed, he meditated in pressure chambers, deep water pockets so dense they sang in his teeth. There, he would sit in perfect stillness, his mind attuning to the lattice of his nodes, feeling the pathways of chi, strength, dexterity, soul, and vitality hum and chime like strings on a drowned harp. He was not alone. At night, the squidlets would return, small black figures that glided near, circling like whispers. The Deep Ones said they were infants, practicing beside him, sensing his energy, drawn to the light of his soul as he began to resemble their kind in spirit if not form. He never spoke to them. But he bowed, and they bowed in kind, and that was enough. When the tides finally shifted again and the Deep Ones declared the training cycle complete, Mikhail X'Cen did not feel relief. He felt forged. He was no longer a pupa fumbling toward greatness. He was Mikhail Caine, the kelpling seed of a legend. But before he was to depart for the spiral of fang and flame, the Deep Ones summoned him once more, not into the murky trench of utter darkness, but into a chamber unlike any he had seen before, the ancient reliquary of the sect. It opened like the maw of a living creature, stone and coral folding back in silence, revealing a vast, cathedral-like vault carved deep into the sea bedrock. Light did not simply shine here, it refracted and danced across mineral veins, captured by reflective crystals and rare bio-lanterns hung from the ceiling like the stars of a forgotten sky. Massive stone shelves arced overhead, covered in relics and treasures from an age long buried. Weapons suspended in containment fields hummed with ancient violence. Armor encrusted with runes drifted gently in their display tombs, each piece wrapped in liquid stasis. Scrolls made from kelp thread and abyssal skins fluttered softly despite the still water. He passed one labeled Abyssal Jaws of the Seventh Pinnacle, then a pair of gauntlets shaped like predatory fish, frozen mid-lunge. Another item bore the name Mantle of the Coral King, a robe that flowed like a current and shimmered with psionic heat. There was the echoing chain, etched with psychic memory loops, and spine of the Leviathan, a polearm constructed from the vertebrae of a planetary-scale sea beast. Mikhail didn't know what most of them did, he didn't dare guess, but the sheer presence of them was overwhelming. These were weapons meant not just to win, but to echo in history. At the center, on a dais of chiseled obsidian, rested his gift. The belt of the Ring of Tides. It gleamed with polished gems cut from hydrocore pearls and storm amber, woven into a shifting metal too alive to be alloy. The surface danced with fractal patterns that pulsed in rhythmic waves, syncing with Mikhail's heartbeat as he approached. A chill ran down his spine, not from fear, but from recognition. The belt wasn't just powerful. It belonged. This, said his escort, a young Deep One by their standards, no less than 1,000 cycles old, is a Tau treasure. It was earned by one of our great wrestler in the earliest cycles of the GEWF. It has passed from legend to rest, until now. Mikhail didn't speak. He could feel it. The artifact was old, yes, but aware. It pulsed not with brute force, but flow. The belt of the Ring of Tides, the Deep One continued, allows one's node system to move like the sea. It counters all forms of node suppression. It cannot be bound, blocked, or cut off. You saw how the blob used pressure to overwhelm. This relic will shield you from such tactics. It is not invincibility. It is flow. And flow is life. Mikhail hesitated. I haven't earned it. The deep one's tendrils swayed with slow amusement. You have. That is why it was stored. Not to be gifted, but to be won. Your path, however short, already echoes through the deep. Take it. Let it anchor you. Let it remind you that legends are not born, they are forged, and carried. And so Mikhail stepped forward, and took the belt of the Ring of Tides. Not as a child grasping at greatness, but as the Shorebraxian who would wrestle fate itself. Michael Caine, bearer of the tides. And soon by any measure, he would bloom. Chapter 12, like a kelpling to a flame. It was a bittersweet morning, strange in how final it felt. The water itself seemed more still that day, as though the currents knew. Mikhail had awakened not to the familiar thrum of training bells or the slow illumination of coral sconces, but to a silence he hadn't felt in months. The kelp scrolls on his shelf were coiled tight, unread. His node network was stable, quiet, even. For the first time since arriving, there was no call to breathwork, no grapple bell, no whispered challenge from an ancient tentacled master. Instead, the door to his dormitory chamber opened with a ceremonial click, and two robed attendants stepped through, faceless save for the faint shimmer of their squid-like masks. It is time, one of them said with a respectful incline. And just like that, it ended. The life that had once seemed so alien, the hours under pressure, the meals of glowing jellyfish flesh, the constant whisper of kelp-woven texts brushing the seabed of his consciousness, had become his entire world. And now it was over. Mikhail stood and bowed, not just to the attendants, but to the room itself. The chamber that had once been a prison, then a temple, now felt like the inside of his own skin. He let the moment pass through him like a tide. The journey to the surface was as ceremonious as it was somber. As they guided him back toward the deep docks, the same route he had once taken, trembling, flanked by envoys in those ghostly suits, Mikhail found the city changed once again. Or as he now knew, it was his own gaze that had matured. The bioluminescent fauna seemed gentler now, the black squidlings more like kin. His limbs moved with instinctive precision, following currents without resistance, like a master fish carving space in the sea. The deepest trench loomed behind him now, and ahead was a vast ascending canal, studded with glowing runes. Above that, somewhere beyond the pressure, was air. And beyond air, stars. He followed the path with his head high, the belt of the Ring of Tides secure around his waist. It pulsed faintly at his hip like a heartbeat, steady and unshakable. It wasn't just a relic. It was his tether. His home. When the canal reached the docking ring, a vast sphere of coralized steel overgrown with light-sensitive anemone, he found the same massive ascension pod that had first delivered him. The vessel hovered in a slowly spinning gyroscopic field, sealed in water until it would breach through to the stratosphere. And with no words, no farewells, the attendant stepped back. He entered. The pod sealed with a hiss. And then he rose. The upward journey was silent, sound stripped away by pressure and movement. The ocean peeled off around him like a womb breaking. Darkness gave way to light, the shimmer of algae blooms becoming the scattered flecks of distant stars. The blue of the water gave way to the endless black of the sky. Space. Real, actual space. Mikhail didn't even notice the transition until the pod cracked open like a seed. And there it was. The planet below him, a roiling ball of mineral and tide. Shorebraxia, his birth planet, cradled in orbital night. And above him, approaching like a dream from ancient Earth legends, was the transport, the celestial crane of coral. It was not what he had expected. He had assumed a rusted troop carrier, or perhaps a military hauler adorned with the symbols of the GEWF. What awaited him was something altogether different. The celestial crane was a fortress in the stars, an orbital palace. Its hull was a blend of gold-veined coral plating and polished bone-like ridges, inscribed with massive calligraphic glyphs that shimmered softly against the vacuum of space. Gardens grew along its dorsal spine. Not synthetic. Real. They stretched like braided rivers, terraced bamboo groves interspersed with bubble chambers full of jellyfish and flying koi. High towers jutted from the ship's spine like pagodas, each housing different training rings, meditation chambers, libraries, and arcane systems Mikhail could only guess at. It was a floating sanctuary. A palace built for warriors who danced between stars and myth. The docking arm extended, locking the pod into a clamshell gate of folded fins. As he stepped forward into the ship's pressurized hull, a breath of warm air rushed over him, infused with salt, incense, and the faint tang of pearl wine. Shorebraxian attendants waited in flowing robes patterned like rippling waves, each one bearing the mark of the deep. These weren't monks. These were the diplomatic staff, the attendants of Deep One envoys and planetary champions. They bowed low as he stepped through. "Honored Kelpling," one said in a smooth, melodious tone, "welcome aboard the Celestial Crane. You travel now as one of Shorebraxia's sacred warriors. Your berth is prepared. Your path is lit. Soon, we will fold to the arena world of Pentia, capital of the sector, where the spiral tournament awaits." Mikhail barely heard them. His eyes were locked on the structure of the ship around him. He walked through halls that mimicked the flow of underwater currents, where translucent koi drifted lazily between curved glass passageways. Wooden floors, actual carved timber, clacked under his feet. Above him, silken tapestries embroidered with scenes of ancient undersea battles fluttered in a breeze that had no source. And in the heart of it all was a garden. A fish garden, a sprawling, spiraling conservatory of semi-liquid air, filled with drifting flora and alien fish. The garden was housed in a clear dome that looked out into space itself. It was designed for meditation during hyperspace jumps, a place where warriors could center themselves while watching the great curtain of the cosmos draw back. "You'll want to be here when we jump," an attendant said, standing beside him. "The hyperfold window opens only for an instant, but it's a glory few outsiders have ever seen." Mikhail said nothing. He took a seat on a floating cushion that hovered beside a softly glowing lily pad. He leaned forward. Waited. Then the lights dimmed. And space broke. It was not a violent shatter. It was more like a melting, a slow unraveling of what space ought to be. The stars outside the dome did not streak as he'd expected. Instead, they spiraled inward, becoming long lines of burning script that danced and curled into a language only the universe understood. Nebulae folded into rings. Comets rewound themselves. Space inverted into colors he had no words for, reds that throbbed like heartbeats, blues that tasted like regret, golds that sounded like laughter. And then it all vanished. In a blink, they were somewhere else. Pentia. A world hanging in orbit below, like a blister of fire and steel. The surface was ringed with stadium lights visible even from the void. Arcologies dotted the surface, each one a spire of wealth and gravity. Atmospheric tethers stretched into space, binding arenas and orbital coliseums like satellites. This was it. The capital of the sector. The host of the spiral tournament of Fang and Flame. And Mikhail, heir of Deep One training, bearer of the Belt of Tides, carrier of a dream that began in a suburban Earth garage with a ladder and a stupid, glorious idea, had finally arrived. He pressed a hand to the belt at his waist. The gem at its center throbbed, responding to his breath, his blood, his resolve. And after a few hours of adjustment after the jump, Mikhail X'Cen sat in serene silence within the garden aboard the luxurious vessel, a place of astonishing tranquility designed explicitly for the contemplation of cosmic grappling forms. Around him, exotic flora glistened beneath the artificial twilight, each bloom breathing a fragrant mystery that seemed to whisper secrets from galaxies far beyond. Yet even amid this splendor, Mikhail remained resolute, his mind anchored firmly in discipline and purpose. The seductive opulence was unmistakably alluring, but he refused to surrender to comfort's deceptive embrace. The elders of the deep sects of Shorebraxia surely meant this indulgence as a cunning trial, testing the resolve of disciples who might easily succumb to luxury. He had no intention of being one of them. A low hum vibrated subtly beneath him, the quiet pulse of faster-than-light drives resonating through the core of the magnificent ship. The speed and majesty of such instant travel still filled him with awe. Regrettably, the entire journey would last no longer than a daylily cycle, hardly enough time to properly savor the wonder. Yet, beneath his brief disappointment lurked a cautious gratitude. Extended indulgence might dull the razor-edged sharpness of his martial mind. The planet of Pentia was known throughout the Galactic Empire Wrestling Federation, GEWF, circuit as a world of stark contrasts. It was a stepping stone to greater glories, but just that in the vessel coming to collect tournament participants, a rusted freighter of dubious vintage, was a sobering reminder that true strength required resilience in the face of austerity. Mikhail inwardly chuckled at the poetic shift awaiting him, knowing it was all part of the deliberate, psychological play crafted by the elders. He flexed his fingers, sensing the rhythm of power coursing through each node. The second breakthrough still radiated fresh in his mind, a crystalline clarity of cosmic knowledge illuminating the dark pathways of his art. Each victory in the virtual realm of seclusion had sharpened his instincts, particularly the harrowing battle between Caine, the disciple, and the infamous meta-ranker known only as the Blob. Mikhail's tactical mind replayed the fight repeatedly, parsing each moment with meticulous care. Caine had nearly seized victory, a tantalizing closeness that now tormented Mikhail's thoughts. It was a matter of flow, he whispered softly, eyes closed, envisioning every strike, every grappling twist, every fluid shift in stance. His meditation deepened, the boundaries of the garden slipping away as his consciousness drifted to the edge of the cosmic abyss. In this mental void, Mikhail's internal nodes surged, aligning themselves into perfect harmony. The dark cosmic grappling technique demanded balance and counterbalance, becoming an intangible force occupying the negative space of the opponent's presence. He imagined Caine's movement slowing, becoming predictable as if time itself dilated, laying bare the subtlest hints of intention in every motion. Mikhail saw clearly now, with the wisdom of retrospection, how the young disciple might have exploited those microscopic tells to claim victory. Throughout the night, he oscillated between deep meditation and meticulous physical training, reinforcing each node within his body, sharpening their responsiveness. Every muscle fiber, every sinew sang with growing confidence, overcoming his lankiness. Yet beneath that veneer of burgeoning mastery lay the careful humility of a true martial adept. He knew his path was fraught with challenge and uncertainty, that true mastery demanded constant evolution. There could be no room for arrogance, no space for complacency. He was surprised, then, when gentle sunlight teased the edges of his awareness, rousing him from a brief, inadvertent slumber. Mikhail blinked in startled confusion, suddenly aware of the stiff ache in his limbs, still locked in the abyssal lotus pose. Rising slowly, he shook off the stiffness, allowing sensation to flood back into his body, a reminder that physical discomfort was merely another facet of training. Master X'Cen, a polite voice chimed from somewhere near the garden entrance. Turning slowly, Mikhail saw an attendant, respectfully maintaining distance as protocol dictated. Yes? Mikhail replied, voice resonating with quiet authority. The transport vessel to Pentia has arrived. He allowed himself a moment to absorb the news, a calm nod signaling his understanding. I will be along shortly. The attendant bowed, withdrawing gracefully, leaving Mikhail alone again amid the garden's serene magnificence. He inhaled deeply, savoring the fragrant air, fortifying his resolve once more. Each step from here onward was a test, a challenge designed to peel away weakness, to reveal only the tempered steel of true cosmic mastery beneath. Leaving the garden behind, he walked through gleaming corridors towards the docking bay. The change in scenery was immediate, soft, soothing aesthetics gave way to utilitarian practicality as he approached the airlock. Waiting beyond was the stark contrast he had anticipated, a grim, battered freighter, its hull scarred by countless journeys and hardships endured. Yet, rather than feeling disappointment, Mikhail embraced the starkness as a necessary crucible. It was here, amidst austerity and hardship, that his training would be tested and proven. With unwavering focus, he stepped onto the worn boarding ramp, the resonant clang of metal beneath his feet marking his transition from luxury to disciplined austerity. Crew members nodded respectfully as he passed, their expressions revealing subtle curiosity and appraisal. Mikhail met their gazes evenly, neither arrogant nor deferential, merely a disciple, steady and focused on the path ahead. The freighter's interior matched its exterior, Spartan, worn, and profoundly authentic in its simplicity. It was the ideal environment for cultivating the strength required to ascend through the ranks of the GEWF. Settling into a narrow berth, he felt a quiet satisfaction rising within him. He had tasted opulence, glimpsed luxury's tempting allure, yet remained unshaken in his commitment. Pentia loomed ahead, a world of struggle, aspiration, and endless possibility. As the freighter's engines hummed to life, sending subtle vibrations through the cabin, Mikhail X'Cen closed his eyes once more. He let his consciousness sink into meditation, focusing sharply on the trials awaiting him. He knew he was prepared, yet the uncertain outcome still hovered on the horizon, a thrilling unknown that kept him sharp, hungry, and ready. And deep within, the cosmic tides whispered their approval, acknowledging the young grappler who had learned to bend but never break beneath the weight of destiny. Mikhail X'Cen gazed through the Spartan, cloudy viewport of the battered freighter, appreciating the solitude, genuine solitude, that enveloped him for the first time in what felt like eternity. Even within the secluded VR chambers of his prior training, solitude had only been superficial. Here, the stark emptiness felt oddly invigorating. His eyes traced the silhouette of the colossal ecumenopolis sprawled beneath, a monstrous industrial titan that shimmered metallically in patches beneath thick, billowing clouds of pollution. The city's expanse was staggering, stretching endlessly in every direction, a mechanical hive pulsing tirelessly with life and activity. Dominating his view was the immense geometric structure known throughout the GEWF as the Quadratic Cage, officially named the Pentaprism Arena. Its angular outline glittered fiercely, crystalline surfaces catching stray beams of orbital sunlight, refracting them into dazzling, prismatic bursts of color. From orbit, the arena looked like an enormous gemstone embedded in the grim industrial landscape, sparkling defiantly as if in opposition to the dreary practicality of the rest of the planet. Even from such height, the cage radiated prestige, a beacon of ambition and power in the Wrestling Federation's sprawling network. As the freighter descended through dense layers of atmosphere, the city became indistinguishable from the hazy, industrial skyline, obscured by smog and vapor trails from countless transports. The metallic hum of the vessel grew louder, vibrating gently as docking clamps engaged with resonant clangs. Mikhail listened intently, each mechanical sound marking his closer approach to destiny. Hissing and depressurization commencing, announced the vessel's robotic voice, calm and devoid of emotion. Mikhail steadied himself, his heartbeat quickening with anticipation. With a sudden, dramatic hiss, the doors plunged open, flooding the cabin with a blinding surge of daylight. He instinctively raised an arm, shielding his eyes from the dazzling brilliance, squinting to make sense of what awaited him beyond the threshold. As the dazzling light faded and Mikhail's vision gradually adjusted, the scene before him surpassed even his wildest imagination, a sight that could have easily captured any American boy's most vibrant dreams, now magnified and transformed by the futuristic enormity of the Galactic Empire Wrestling Federation. Stretching endlessly, like a city within a city, the colossal concourse sprawled before him, a throbbing artery pulsing with the flow of countless beings. Here, streams of spectators poured toward their seating or diverted into the mysterious depths of the quadratic cage's inner chambers where combatants awaited their chance at glory. The arena was an engineering marvel, towering far beyond any stadium from Earth's modest sporting events. It had the stark, uncompromising aesthetic of brutalist architecture, amplified by industrial grime and the passage of time. Massive concrete slabs soared toward distant heights, their stark surfaces cracked and scarred, bearing the history of countless duels and battles. Rust-stained metallic girders intersected at impossible angles, casting harsh shadows beneath artificial suns, massive spotlights that illuminated the battleground below in unrelenting, stark brilliance. Gigantic screens flickered and flashed, broadcasting continuous streams of promotional content, previous battle highlights, and upcoming matches, creating an overwhelming tapestry of sound and visuals. Everywhere, digital billboards dominated sightlines, bombarding Mikhail with vibrant, kinetic advertisements for GEWF events. The calling cards of famous wrestlers flashed boldly, each accompanied by meticulously choreographed sequences of their most awe-inspiring victories. Names appeared and vanished in a mesmerizing rhythm, all urging the crowd into an ecstatic frenzy of anticipation. Mikhail stood transfixed momentarily, caught in the sheer majesty and spectacle of it all. Yet today was not merely about spectacle or sightseeing, despite how easily he could lose himself in the magnificence. Steeling his resolve, he pressed forward, weaving through throngs of bustling spectators and imposing fighters, each eager for their own slice of glory. This was his mission, registering his presence at the tournament, ensuring his place among the myriad hopefuls eager to stake their claim on history. As Mikhail moved deeper into the quadratic cage, he became acutely aware of his own modest stature among the enormous variety of competitors around him. Accustomed to being the largest in any given room, his 4 youthful, muscular arms already formidable by human standards, he now felt dwarfed, humbled by towering beings whose natural size made his burgeoning strength appear almost trivial. Towering insectoids clicked their mandibles in quiet contemplation, hulking reptilian brutes shifted their massive tails impatiently, and elegant avian warriors adjusted their plumage with dignified precision. Alien species he had never encountered before moved purposefully alongside him, each competitor radiating quiet intensity and steely confidence. Feeling a rare pang of self-consciousness, Mikhail clenched his fists tighter, using the discomfort as fuel to sharpen his resolve. Strength in this tournament was not simply physical, it demanded mental fortitude, adaptability, and unyielding determination. He was here to prove himself worthy of the greatest stage in wrestling history, the Pinnacle Dome on Slamdara Prime. Navigating through crowded corridors, Mikhail caught brief, tantalizing glimpses of the main stage through open archways. The roar of the crowd was deafening, echoing down halls with an intensity that set his pulse racing. In these fleeting moments, he glimpsed fighters locked in furious battle, their clashes broadcast simultaneously across massive overhead screens. The excitement was infectious, almost tangible, urging him forward toward his destiny. Eventually, he found himself shepherded along with countless other hopefuls down an enormous corridor, lined with stark concrete walls echoing each footstep into a cacophony of determination and nerves. Here, the initial awe began to fade slightly, replaced by a creeping anxiety as he realized the sheer number of combatants assembled. Never before, in either life, had he seen so many contenders in one place, each vying desperately for those few coveted positions that led directly to Slamdara Prime. The Pinnacle Dome was no mere stepping stone, it was the gateway to immortality within the GEWF, and the significance of this event suddenly weighed heavily upon him. The waiting area into which he was guided was a vast gymnasium, stripped bare of comforts, furnished only with stark digital screens displaying upcoming brackets and fight details. Mikhail approached a harried attendant, registering his name swiftly before stepping into the crowded common area, standing room only. Everywhere he looked, competitors waited anxiously, their faces betraying varying shades of excitement, apprehension, and fierce ambition. How many fighters were here? How many rounds would be necessary to filter such an immense number down to those worthy of the highest stage? He knew this enormous facility held countless subarenas dedicated to the grueling bracket rounds, ensuring only the highest tier fights were displayed in the Grand Central Arena. This knowledge was comforting, offering a sense of scale to the enormous undertaking, but it also amplified his tension. The magnitude of competition was staggering, overwhelming. He breathed deeply, calming his racing thoughts, reminding himself of the months of training, the breakthroughs he had achieved in isolation, the mastery he had attained over his burgeoning nodes and skills. This was his moment, the first true test of his abilities against competitors as driven as he was. Around him, the youthful hopefuls of the sector mingled, eyeing each other warily or exchanging tense nods of mutual respect. Mikhail could sense the collective energy building, a storm of anticipation brewing beneath the stark, utilitarian lights of the waiting room. The screens flickered, numbers and names shifting constantly as brackets began to fill. In the midst of this gathering storm, Mikhail X'Cen felt his own doubts recede slightly. His journey had prepared him uniquely, he had lived 2 lives, trained under masters of the deep cosmos, and glimpsed secrets many of his peers might never fathom. While physically smaller than many around him, his potential was untapped, a hidden reservoir of strength waiting to surge forth at precisely the right moment. As competitors shuffled nervously around him, adjusting gear, murmuring strategy, or simply staring fixedly at the screens, Mikhail observed brief attempts at conversation in small, anxious groups, but most seemed too on edge to do anything other than wait in tense silence. Despite the palpable tension, Mikhail felt a quiet, assured confidence blossoming deep within his heart. The path was challenging, the competition formidable, yet within these harsh confines, amid concrete, steel, and the hum of nervous anticipation, he felt precisely where he needed to be. This was the quadratic cage, the crucible of champions. It was here, amidst brutalist grandeur and industrial grime, where legends were forged from flesh and will. And Mikhail knew, deep in the marrow of his being, he was ready to seize this moment, ready to rise above every challenge and claim his rightful place among the stars. As the dazzling light faded and Mikhail's vision gradually adjusted, the scene before him surpassed even his wildest imagination, a sight that could have easily captured any American boy's most vibrant dreams, now magnified and transformed by the futuristic enormity of the Galactic Empire Wrestling Federation. Stretching endlessly, like a city within a city, the colossal concourse sprawled before him, a throbbing artery pulsing with the flow of countless beings. Here, streams of spectators poured toward their seating or diverted into the mysterious depths of the quadratic cage's inner chambers where combatants awaited their chance at glory. The arena was an engineering marvel, towering far beyond any stadium from Earth's modest sporting events. It had the stark, uncompromising aesthetic of brutalist architecture, amplified by industrial grime and the passage of time. Massive concrete slabs soared toward distant heights, their stark surfaces cracked and scarred, bearing the history of countless duels and battles. Rust-stained metallic girders intersected at impossible angles, casting harsh shadows beneath artificial suns, massive spotlights that illuminated the battleground below in unrelenting, stark brilliance. Gigantic screens flickered and flashed, broadcasting continuous streams of promotional content, previous battle highlights, and upcoming matches, creating an overwhelming tapestry of sound and visuals. Everywhere, digital billboards dominated sightlines, bombarding Mikhail with vibrant, kinetic advertisements for GEWF events. The calling cards of famous wrestlers flashed boldly, each accompanied by meticulously choreographed sequences of their most awe-inspiring victories. Names appeared and vanished in a mesmerizing rhythm, all urging the crowd into an ecstatic frenzy of anticipation. Mikhail stood transfixed momentarily, caught in the sheer majesty and spectacle of it all. Yet today was not merely about spectacle or sightseeing, despite how easily he could lose himself in the magnificence. Steeling his resolve, he pressed forward, weaving through throngs of bustling spectators and imposing fighters, each eager for their own slice of glory. This was his mission, registering his presence at the tournament, ensuring his place among the myriad hopefuls eager to stake their claim on history. As Mikhail moved deeper into the quadratic cage, he became acutely aware of his own modest stature among the enormous variety of competitors around him. Accustomed to being the largest in any given room, his 4 youthful, muscular arms already formidable by human standards, he now felt dwarfed, humbled by towering beings whose natural size made his burgeoning strength appear almost trivial. Towering insectoids clicked their mandibles in quiet contemplation, Hulking reptilian brutes shifted their massive tails impatiently, and elegant avian warriors adjusted their plumage with dignified precision. Alien species he had never encountered before moved purposefully alongside him, each competitor radiating quiet intensity and steely confidence. Feeling a rare pang of self-consciousness, Mikhail clenched his fists tighter, using the discomfort as fuel to sharpen his resolve. Strength in this tournament was not simply physical, it demanded mental fortitude, adaptability, and unyielding determination. He was here to prove himself worthy of the greatest stage in wrestling history, the Pinnacle Dome on Slamdara Prime. Navigating through crowded corridors, Mikhail caught brief, tantalizing glimpses of the main stage through open archways. The roar of the crowd was deafening, echoing down halls with an intensity that set his pulse racing. In these fleeting moments, he glimpsed fighters locked in furious battle, their clashes broadcast simultaneously across massive overhead screens. The excitement was infectious, almost tangible, urging him forward toward his destiny. Eventually, he found himself shepherded along with countless other hopefuls down an enormous corridor, lined with stark concrete walls echoing each footstep into a cacophony of determination and nerves. Here, the initial awe began to fade slightly, replaced by a creeping anxiety as he realized the sheer number of combatants assembled. Never before, in either life, had he seen so many contenders in one place, each vying desperately for those few coveted positions that led directly to Slamdara Prime. The Pinnacle Dome was no mere stepping stone, it was the gateway to immortality within the GEWF, and the significance of this event suddenly weighed heavily upon him. The waiting area into which he was guided was a vast gymnasium, stripped bare of comforts, furnished only with stark digital screens displaying upcoming brackets and fight details. Mikhail approached a harried attendant, registering his name swiftly before stepping into the crowded common area, standing room only. Everywhere he looked, competitors waited anxiously, their faces betraying varying shades of excitement, apprehension, and fierce ambition. How many fighters were here? How many rounds would be necessary to filter such an immense number down to those worthy of the highest stage? He knew this enormous facility held countless sub-arenas dedicated to the grueling bracket rounds, ensuring only the highest tier fights were displayed in the Grand Central Arena. This knowledge was comforting, offering a sense of scale to the enormous undertaking, but it also amplified his tension. The magnitude of competition was staggering, overwhelming. He breathed deeply, calming his racing thoughts, reminding himself of the months of training, the breakthroughs he had achieved in isolation, the mastery he had attained over his burgeoning nodes and skills. This was his moment, the first true test of his abilities against competitors as driven as he was. Around him, the youthful hopefuls of the sector mingled, eyeing each other warily or exchanging tense nods of mutual respect. Mikhail could sense the collective energy building, a storm of anticipation brewing beneath the stark, utilitarian lights of the waiting room. The screens flickered, numbers and names shifting constantly as brackets began to fill. In the midst of this gathering storm, Mikhail X'Cen felt his own doubts recede slightly. His journey had prepared him uniquely, he had lived 2 lives, trained under masters of the deep cosmos, and glimpsed secrets many of his peers might never fathom. While physically smaller than many around him, his potential was untapped, a hidden reservoir of strength waiting to surge forth at precisely the right moment. As competitors shuffled nervously around him, adjusting gear, murmuring strategy, or simply staring fixedly at the screens, Mikhail observed brief attempts at conversation in small, anxious groups, but most seemed too on edge to do anything other than wait in tense silence. Despite the palpable tension, Mikhail felt a quiet, assured confidence blossoming deep within his heart. The path was challenging, the competition formidable, yet within these harsh confines, amid concrete, steel, and the hum of nervous anticipation, he felt precisely where he needed to be. This was the quadratic cage, the crucible of champions. It was here, amidst brutalist grandeur and industrial grime, where legends were forged from flesh and will. Snapping Mikhail out of his reverie was a sudden, strong grip on his shoulder. Turning around quickly, his gaze traveled upward, meeting the enormous, solitary eye of a towering cyclopean figure. The creature's singular horn gleamed slightly under the harsh artificial lights, and a wide, somewhat silly grin spread across its broad face. "You seem pretty strong," the Cyclops rumbled in a voice deep enough to vibrate the very air around him. He paused oddly, giving the words weight before continuing, "Most folks around here don't have a robust cultivation base. I can sense yours, it's powerful. How about us 2 strong ones stick together?" Mikhail hesitated, initially put off by the creature's abrupt manner, but soon found himself warming to the Cyclops' genuinely earnest demeanor and the reassuring aura of sincerity that radiated from him. "I'm Krog Gore," the Cyclops finally introduced himself, extending a massive hand with careful gentleness. "Mikhail X'Cen," he replied firmly, gripping the Cyclops' enormous palm as best he could. Intrigued, Mikhail leaned slightly closer, sensing something more behind Krogor's rough exterior. You can really sense that much detail about their cultivation bases? He asked, genuinely curious. Krogor shrugged, his massive shoulders heaving easily. Yeah, it's not too hard if you know what you're looking for. Most folks here just puff themselves up, lots of bravado, but not much substance underneath. I've trained my eye well, he chuckled deeply, his single eye crinkling warmly, to spot the difference. Mikhail smiled, impressed despite himself. So, who around here actually has a genuine cultivation worth noting, besides us? He pressed further, genuinely interested in Krogor's unique insights. Krogor scanned the room carefully, his eye narrowing thoughtfully. A few, he rumbled after a brief pause, pointing discreetly with a stubby finger. That insectoid over there, quiet but very controlled energy. The avian warrior, too, stronger than he lets on, calm exterior masking a fierce cultivation base. Recognizing Krogor's hidden depth, Mikhail's curiosity deepened. That's quite impressive, he remarked thoughtfully. Could someone like me train to sense cultivation the way you do? What's your method? Krogor revealed a wide, genuine smile, evidently pleased by Mikhail's keen interest. Ah, well, it's a bit unique to my kind, he explained, tapping lightly near his singular eye. Most cyclopes have a natural knack due to our bloodlines. But, he added, leaning in conspiratorially, anyone can learn to sense auras and power levels if they truly reach inwardly. Once you understand your own energy, you can reach outwardly. Easier for some, harder for others, it depends on your path. He paused, studying Mikhail carefully. Have you ever felt that prickle at the back of your neck, that sudden awareness of danger in someone's presence? If you have, then you've already taken your first steps toward sensing aura levels. Mikhail nodded thoughtfully, his respect for the Cyclops deepening. Behind Krogor's oafish exterior and cheerful demeanor lay a subtle wisdom that resonated with Mikhail's own growing understanding of cosmic cultivation. Clearly, Krogor was far more talented, and useful, than he'd initially appeared. While enjoying the small talk, Mikhail glanced around as the last stragglers filtered into the waiting area, the screens now rapidly filling with tournament brackets. Reflecting on Krogor's words, he decided to test the Cyclops' advice for himself. Mikhail closed his eyes briefly, reaching inward to sense his own energy clearly before cautiously extending his awareness outward toward the individuals Krogor had pointed out earlier. At first, the sensation was fleeting, just a whisper of awareness brushing against his senses, uncertain, delicate, easily lost. Yet, it was undeniably there, a brief glimmer of success. Encouraged, Mikhail opened his eyes, now even more determined to refine this newfound skill. Chapter 13, The Tournament Begins. As Mikhail continued experimenting with the delicate art of sensing cultivation auras, a collective anticipation surged through the room, drawing his attention back to the crowd around him. A synchronized hush fell upon the wrestlers gathered within the vast, bare gymnasium as the screens flickered simultaneously, their myriad colorful displays coalescing into one unified image. Instantly, recognition and excitement spread through the throng, with whispers and murmurs rippling outward. The figure that appeared was none other than Olga Steele, the famed diva of the fist from Slamdara Prime herself. Her distinctive pink hair cascaded in luxurious waves around broad shoulders, her muscular physique accentuated proudly by her elaborate arena costume, a bold statement in chrome and deep violet. Olga's presence alone sent ripples of awe and admiration through many of the competitors, her fame and allure well known throughout the Galactic Empire Wrestling Federation. While Mikhail himself did not fully grasp the infatuation, he respected the gravity she commanded. With practiced ease and a confident smile, Olga Steele raised a gleaming microphone, her voice clear and captivating as it resonated throughout the chamber. Welcome, combatants. You have gathered here, each of you seeking glory, prestige, and perhaps even an invitation to the esteemed Pinnacle Dome of Slamdara Prime. Today marks the beginning of your journey in the tournament of Fang and Fire. She gestured elegantly toward the expansive, dynamic bracket chart shimmering on a green screen backdrop behind her, which shifted fluidly as she continued. Matches shall commence with 50 simultaneous bouts across various sub-arenas. Each combatant will face 2 opponents today, testing your skills, resolve, and adaptability. Those who survive today will compete once per day henceforth, as the competition shifts to single elimination rounds. Mikhail's mind rapidly calculated the numbers Olga presented. He was somewhat relieved to discover that the vast initial impression of the tournament had been somewhat misleading. The initial flood of competitors would quickly narrow to a manageable number. Still, the challenge was significant. His attention sharpened further as Olga detailed the rules of combat, youth GEWF regulations, strictly non-lethal engagements designed to test skill, not savagery. A cheer rose at Olga's next announcement, the finals, of course, will grace our main stage, the very heart of the quadratic cage. She paused dramatically, allowing the importance of her words to echo through the crowd before continuing with an amused grin. And remember, competitors, the grand prize is not merely victory today. The top 8 finalists, yes, all 8, will be granted the honor of competing in the Pinnacle Dome. Mikhail's eyebrows rose in surprise. The Deep Ones had spoken of the Pinnacle Dome as though only the single champion would earn entry. It seemed they had deliberately understated the reality, pushing him toward excellence beyond mere qualification. A clever, manipulative, yet ultimately effective tactic, and he felt a surge of renewed determination pulse through him. As Olga concluded her briefing, the screens returned to the detailed brackets. Mikhail's eyes scanned swiftly, heart quickening in excitement when he found his name, Michael Caine, placed comfortably in the second wave of 50 entrants. His journey, truly, was about to begin in earnest. Nearby, Kroggor released a booming chuckle and clapped one enormous hand onto Mikhail's shoulder again, gently this time. "Looks like I'm up first," he rumbled, his single eye twinkling with excitement. "Watch my match, will ya? Tell me if I embarrass myself." Mikhail nodded warmly, "You'll do great." "Ah, confidence." "Good man," Kroggor replied with another resonant laugh, waving broadly as he disappeared toward one of the numerous passageways leading toward the smaller sub-arenas. Turning his attention back to the massive screens overhead, Mikhail watched them split into multiple views, each displaying 4 simultaneous matches. Competitors filed into separate arenas, each designed as a scaled-down version of the quadratic cage's central stage, angular platforms ringed with high-energy barriers, audience stands brimming with eager, shouting spectators. The energy and anticipation, even in these smaller arenas, matched that of any grand-scale event. Mikhail found Kroggor quickly on a screen situated toward the lower left corner. The Cyclops stood confidently in the ring, his enormous frame dwarfing the referee who stood between him and his opponent, a wiry, agile-looking reptilian combatant with glistening blue scales. Kroggor's massive fist rose in respectful salute, his body visibly radiating calm strength, unwavering beneath the harsh glare of the artificial lights. The referee stepped back, signaling the start of the match. Mikhail's senses sharpened intensely, eyes locked onto the unfolding drama. Kroggor immediately adopted a grounded stance, his single eye narrowing as he assessed his opponent carefully. The reptilian fighter, meanwhile, shifted from side to side, darting swiftly across the mat with astonishing speed. As the reptilian combatant lunged forward, Kroggor met the attack with a fluid counter, his massive hand intercepting and redirecting the strike with practiced ease. Mikhail leaned forward unconsciously, absorbing every subtlety of the encounter. Kroggor's skill was evident, his casual demeanor hiding a profound mastery of combat fundamentals. Each move was deliberate, economical, yet infused with powerful intent. As the match intensified, Mikhail briefly closed his eyes, attempting once again to tap into the aura-sensing technique Kroggor had suggested. He reached inward first, solidifying his internal awareness, before extending tentatively toward the energies radiating from Kroggor and his opponent. To his excitement, he briefly felt a flicker of clarity, sensing the Cyclops' immense, calm strength, a steady aura radiating outward, unperturbed even in the heat of combat. The reptilian's aura, contrastingly, felt frenetic, energized but unfocused. The match progressed swiftly, Kroggor systematically dismantling his opponent's defenses with patient precision. The final decisive grapple, a restrained yet authoritative hold to the reptilian's midsection, sent his opponent duplexing him backwards, signaling an undeniable victory. The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers audible even through the screens. Kroggor bowed respectfully to his defeated opponent before turning to face the audience, his broad grin illuminated by the vibrant arena lights. Watching his new friend's triumph, Mikhail felt a renewed surge of confidence. He had made a powerful ally, one whose insights and abilities would undoubtedly enhance his own. As the matches on-screen concluded one by one, anticipation surged anew in Mikhail's chest. His time was rapidly approaching. Breathing deeply, he centered himself, reflecting briefly on the extensive training he'd undertaken, the powerful skills he had cultivated in isolation, and the profound, unwavering determination that had carried him this far. Mikhail had checked the bracket carefully, memorizing the name of his first opponent in the upcoming sub-match. The name didn't strike any particular recognition or fear within him, but the reality of this crucial moment certainly did. This was the first rung on the ladder leading toward the triumph he so desperately sought. A momentary rush of nerves fluttered briefly in his chest, but he quickly quelled it, steeling himself by focusing deeply inward. He channeled his chi through each of his nodes, feeling the reassuring, powerful connection with his Tao treasure, the belt of tides, resonating profoundly through his very essence. The stark, Glaring lights bathed him in brightness as he stepped confidently into one of the sub-arenas. Instantly, he was greeted by the overwhelming spectacle of virtual holographic spectators filling the stands, their indistinct forms flickering with vibrant energy. Mixed among them were actual attendees, ticket holders, official scouts, and officials from various planetary delegations. Their faces were illuminated intermittently by the dizzying flash of lights and holographic projections. The air buzzed palpably with excitement, the scale and grandeur of the moment unmistakable. This was not merely an isolated event, it was being broadcast across the entire Galactic Empire, a spectacle for countless eyes, a testament to potential greatness. With the fervent roar of spectators, both real and virtual, echoing around him, Mikhail took a deep breath, centering himself in calm resolve. Today would mark not just his first genuine step into greatness but a declaration that would echo across the vast expanse of the Galactic Empire Wrestling Federation. But before Mikhail could let himself get carried away, stepping boldly into the ring opposite him was his first opponent, Zardak, a towering member of a crocodilian race unfamiliar to him. Zardak's hulking form was intimidating, his scaled hide glistening ominously under the harsh arena lights, and a sharp, disdainful grin stretched across his elongated snout. "Michael Caine, is it?" Zardak growled mockingly, loud enough for the nearby spectators to hear clearly. "Never heard of you. Must be fresh meat, huh? Don't worry, runt, I'll make sure your defeat looks good on the highlight reels." Mikhail remained silent, eyes narrowing slightly as he absorbed the taunts. Zardak, sensing an easy target, continued, his voice dripping with smug arrogance, "Hope you're ready to crawl back to whatever backwater asteroid spawned you. The GEWF isn't a playground for weaklings pretending at greatness." A ripple of laughter from the crowd only encouraged Zardak further. He flexed his massive claws menacingly, clearly relishing the spectacle, his voice dripping contempt as he sneered, "Just try not to embarrass yourself too badly, I'd hate to ruin my reputation by crushing someone who's never had a chance." The bell hadn't rung yet, but Mikhail's resolve hardened with each insult. Any lingering hesitation vanished, replaced by a steely determination to demonstrate precisely why he had come this far. His opponent had unknowingly gifted him motivation, and now Michael Caine was ready to deliver a response the galaxy wouldn't soon forget. As the two combatants approached the center of the ring, the referee stepped in between them, his voice amplified clearly through the microphone attached to his collar, competing loudly against the vibrant, ceaseless color commentary that reverberated throughout the arena. Overhead, the announcers could be heard dissecting each contestant in vivid detail, their energetic voices contributing to the cacophony of noise. "Here we have Michael Caine, a relatively unknown entity stepping boldly into his first major GEWF challenge. Facing him, Zardak, a young fighter with a vicious reputation, known for making quick work of newcomers to the Riverwater sex of Getty Primordial. Will Caine rise to the challenge, or become just another notch on Zardak's belt?" Michael had often listened to announcers weaving compelling narratives around combatants, but hearing his own match dissected live startled him momentarily. It was an unexpected advantage, half the battle in the GEWF was controlling the narrative of one's ascent. Standing face to face, Michael maintained a composed demeanor as the referee prepared to signal the start of the match. However, the instant the official moved his hand downward to begin, Zardak juke lunged prematurely, his massive frame appearing to barrel forward a full second before the bell officially sounded. Caught momentarily off guard by his opponent's blatant disregard for the rules, Michael staggered backward, forced immediately onto the defensive. The referee vanished in an instant as his hand signaled the official commencement of the match, leaving only the echo of his voice resonating through the arena. In perfect synchrony, the floor beneath Mikhail's feet shifted dramatically. The quadratic cage surged upward with a mechanical rumble, reshaping itself swiftly into a mesmerizing five-sided polygon. Each face of the cage became its own distinct battleground, each with unique gravitational fields pulling independently, challenging combatants to adapt on the fly. Above their heads, a series of flexible, elastic ropes materialized, reminiscent of classic wrestling rings from Earth's ancient sporting events. The ropes shimmered slightly, inviting and perilous, clearly designed for launching ambitious aerial assaults or agile evasions across to another mat. Mikhail took a brief, fascinated glance upward at this structural marvel, appreciating the ingenuity, yet that fleeting distraction nearly cost him dearly. Zardak, seizing the fractional moment of surprise, lunged forward again. His massive crocodilian frame moved with an explosiveness that belied its bulky appearance, unleashing a flurry of powerful, sweeping strikes that cut through the air with audible ferocity. Mikhail narrowly sidestepped, each motion flowing instinctively, powered by reflexes honed from countless hours submerged beneath the crushing pressures of the abyssal trenches. His movements caught the eye of the commentators, whose vibrant voices thundered above the cheers, interwoven with the echoing clangor of combat. "Look at this, folks. Michael Caine's reflexes are astounding, like liquid steel. It's clear his training in the abyssal trenches wasn't just for show. You can practically see the thousands of tons of oceanic pressure etched into every movement he makes. Despite their praise, Mikhail grimaced inwardly as the commentators inadvertently laid bare his combat instincts and training secrets. Yet, before frustration could root itself in his mind, Zardak pressed the assault harder, each powerful claw swipe and crushing grapple aimed meticulously to tax Mikhail's stamina, to push him into a fatal error. But Mikhail's foundation was ironclad, forged in the merciless depths, and he remained vigilant and agile, his nodes shimmering beneath his skin, cycling the potent chi energies that flowed through his well-developed channels. As Zardak lunged again, Mikhail pivoted, sidestepping smoothly onto an adjacent mat face with differing gravity, the sudden shift in direction and orientation causing his crocodilian opponent to momentarily stumble, his heavier form betrayed by inertia. The crowd erupted in delight at the elegant maneuver, clearly appreciating Mikhail's clever tactical mind. The announcers seized the moment enthusiastically. Outstanding spatial awareness by Michael Caine. He's using the quadratic cage's multidirectional gravity to perfection. Zardak's brute force approach might be dominant elsewhere, but against Caine's agility and adaptive brilliance, it's clearly at a disadvantage. The crocodilian combatant snarled in anger, fury evident in his glowing amber eyes. He sprang toward Mikhail once more, a surge of raw aggression propelling him, his muscular frame astonishingly nimble for its size. The commentators' voices, acknowledging the fierce competitor, boomed fairly through the arena. Zardak's offensive is unrelenting, his aggressive style truly showcases the overwhelming physical dominance his race is known for. A powerful contender, he's keeping Caine on constant alert. Yet this time, Mikhail was ready. Reaching deep within, he engaged his chi nodes consciously, feeling each node resonate harmoniously with the Tao treasure, the belt of tides. A tranquil calm settled over him, and he felt every sensation of the fight sharply amplified. Time itself seemed to slow, every detail crystal clear. In this hyper-aware state, he perfectly timed a precise defensive grapple. Zardak's massive arm swung down like a hammer, but Mikhail deftly intercepted, using the croc's momentum against him, twisting and locking the limb into a classic but devastating armbar. Zardak roared, thrashing furiously, his powerful tail whipping violently in desperate attempts to strike Mikhail. Incredible reversal by Caine. He's turned Zardak's strength against him beautifully. Can he maintain the hold against such overwhelming physical power? Mikhail felt his opponent's immense strength straining against him, muscles rippling and burning as he held the armbar. The energy he channeled surged through his nodes, stabilizing him, allowing his mind clarity amidst the chaos. Yet, he knew holding this position was unsustainable against an opponent so powerful. With calculated precision, he released the hold, using the momentum to vault gracefully upward, grabbing the overhead ropes. In a spectacular display of athletic prowess, Mikhail launched himself from the ropes, somersaulting midair with a fluidity that captivated the audience. Zardak barely had time to register the shift before Mikhail descended rapidly, harnessing the adjusted gravity of the quadratic cage's central space. He landed squarely atop the crocodilian's broad shoulders, instantly transitioning into a constricting head scissors. Astounding aerial acrobatics from Michael Caine. The rookie is redefining agility and creativity in the quadratic cage. The crowd roared louder still, exhilarated by the dazzling spectacle unfolding before them. Zardak, trapped beneath Mikhail's fierce grip, staggered but maintained his balance stubbornly, his powerful legs fighting to remain upright. Knowing he could not hold indefinitely, Mikhail channeled deeper, the chi from his nodes flooding his muscles with renewed vigor. With an explosive twist, he leveraged his position, using Zardak's precarious stance against him. The crocodilian titan toppled, his massive form crashing heavily onto an adjacent mat. Now on top, Mikhail swiftly maneuvered into a dominant position, his arms expertly securing Zardak's flailing limbs. Recognizing the unique gravitational fields of the quadratic cage, he focused intently on the low-gravity zone near the cage's center. Leveraging this distinct advantage, Mikhail lifted Zardak upwards toward what appeared to be the roof, utilizing the cage's multidirectional gravity to invert their orientation. Just as the crocodilian's body seemed to reach the apex, the gravitational force reversed, slamming him forcefully down against what had now become the floor, pinning him decisively onto the mat in a breathtaking display of tactical precision and sheer strength. Michael Caine with a phenomenal supplex reversal. He's pinned Zardak, exploiting the quadratic cage's gravity variations like a seasoned veteran. The pupil prodigy demonstrating the kind of skills that set champions apart. A shimmering holographic image of the referee appeared immediately beside them, dropping swiftly to the mat, his translucent hand slapping down with audible clarity as he began the count. 1. Mikhail pressed down harder, sensing victory within his grasp, even as Zardak struggled frantically beneath him. 2. The energy within the quadratic cage swelled to an almost feverish pitch, every eye fixed intensely on this pivotal moment. Mikhail's heart raced, adrenaline mixing with his chi, nodes pulsing rhythmically with the promise of triumph. The referee's hand rose once more, poised for the final count as the crowd held its collective breath, suspended in anticipation of Michael Caine's emergence as a bona fide force in the Galactic Empire Wrestling Federation. In that electrifying instant, Michael Caine felt nothing but pure elation surging through his entire being. All those countless, grueling hours of training, the endless repetitions beneath Earth's distant sun in his backyard, the relentless meditation sessions and form training in this strange new existence, had finally coalesced into this singular, perfect moment of victory. Yet, just as quickly as triumph surged within him, something shifted terribly, unmistakably wrong. A sudden, disorienting chill flooded through his limbs as though all four of his powerful arms had been plunged into a roaring, icy torrent. His muscles spasmed involuntarily, strength draining away in a heartbeat. He struggled to maintain the pin, confusion and urgency gripping him simultaneously. A piercing sensation of imminent danger prickled the base of his skull, an instinct so sharp and primal that Michael reacted without conscious thought. He flung himself backward and upward in the split second before Zardak erupted explosively from the mat, jaws snapping and scales glistening fiercely beneath the glaring arena lights. Zardak roared triumphantly, but confusion lingered briefly in his reptilian eyes. He snarled incredulously, his voice a harsh rasp of frustration, "You shouldn't have moved. That roar and soul node invasion should have paralyzed you completely." Michael's mind raced, swiftly analyzing the sudden change. The Belt of Tides, the Tau treasure specifically designed to guard him against body node suppression attacks, had functioned exactly as intended, negating the devastating effects of Zardak's body node roar completely. However, the accompanying soul node invasion had slipped through, subtly weakening him just enough to disrupt his grip. Understanding flashed through Michael's mind, recognizing the vulnerability not in his treasure, but in his soul node's unexpected susceptibility. He quickly recalibrated, preparing to face Zardak's renewed offensive. The crocodilian giant lunged with fresh fury, his movements rapid and ferocious, emboldened by his near success. The commentators erupted with excited praise, their words echoing through the cavernous quadratic cage, Zardak turning the tide spectacularly. His incredible soul-rattling roar is shaking even the strongest fighter's resolve. Michael Caine's momentary hesitation might cost him dearly. Forced onto the defensive, Michael moved with a dancer's precision, narrowly evading Zardak's aggressive strikes and snapping jaws. Each dodge cost him precious energy, each evasion leaving him scant inches from disaster. Yet, as his body moved through the perilous choreography of survival, his mind surged ahead, weaving a meticulous plan born of desperation and ingenuity. Each step backward was calculated, every sidestep and feint laid the foundation for a decisive counterstrike. Drawing deeply from the calm center forged by his arduous training, Michael reached inward, reconnecting deliberately with the nodes that flowed steadily beneath his skin. He allowed the fight around him to blur into a rhythmic pattern, a relentless ebb and flow of strikes and retreats, building towards a carefully conceived climax. His nodes hummed with readiness, gathering latent chi, his entire being poised like a coiled spring awaiting release. With an audible gasp from the crowd, Michael deliberately placed himself into a corner of the polygonal cage. To the spectators, it appeared an act of desperation, a fighter backed against the ropes, nowhere left to flee. The commentators seized the moment excitedly. Michael Caine looks cornered. Has Zardak finally exhausted his defiant opponent's bag of tricks? Zardak, sensing victory at hand, charged forward recklessly, teeth bared in primal fury. Yet Michael had anticipated this exact moment, had set this precise trap. With perfect timing, he surged forward just as Zardak reached striking range, slipping beneath the reptilian titan's lunging strike. Michael's nodes flared brilliantly, their energies aligning in perfect harmony. His body became a conduit, each muscle fiber infused with purpose. In a blur of motion, Michael twisted gracefully upward, leveraging the unique gravitational axis of their quadrant. His lower arms seized Zardak's massive jaws in an iron grip, while his upper arms locked around his opponent's muscular neck. Using Zardak's momentum, Michael rotated midair, launching himself and his foe towards the center of the quadratic cage. The commentators were beside themselves, their voices strained with excitement. Unbelievable maneuver by Michael Caine. He's harnessing gravity itself again. Using Zardak's power against him. This is unprecedented. At the apex of their ascent, Michael executed another agile twist, directing Zardak's massive body downward with expert precision. Gravity reversed sharply, accelerating their descent, and Zardak impacted the floor with a bone-jarring crash, stunning him briefly. Seizing the opportunity, Michael rebounded upward, gripping the flexible ropes suspended in the center of the quadratic cage. Using their elastic tension, he propelled himself high into the arena's airspace, gaining significant altitude directly over Zardak but below the gravity change. Suspended momentarily, Michael aligned his body meticulously, the roaring crowd beneath him a distant, pulsing heartbeat of anticipation. Every ounce of his being resonated with the culmination of his relentless training, hours upon hours of grueling effort beneath the seas, studying the foundational forms from his earliest training manuals, and the rigorous, disciplined sessions spent mastering the subtleties of his newfound strength and creativity. This was more than just a finishing move, it was the embodiment of everything he had learned and refined from both his past life and the depths of this strange new universe. Drawing deep from his chi, Michael channeled energy through every node, a vibrant, radiant flow that pulsed outward with intense purpose. His movements fused seamlessly with the precision of the techniques outlined meticulously in the first 2 editions of his training manuals, enhanced by his own unique innovations and adaptations. Then, with a sudden burst of kinetic force, Michael dove downward in a spiraling motion, his body spinning with breathtaking speed and unmatched precision. This was the abyssal spiral, his masterpiece, a dazzling convergence of discipline, ingenuity, and raw power. He crashed onto Zardak with tremendous impact, their bodies colliding fiercely onto the mat, amplifying the gravitational force in a stunning, awe-inspiring display of tactical mastery that reverberated throughout the arena. A deafening boom reverberated throughout the quadratic cage, the crowd erupting into frenzied cheers. Flying drinks and refreshments momentarily obscured the scene, tension stretching unbearably as the commentators struggled to maintain their professional composure. Incredible. We've never seen anything like this. Michael Caine just executed a move that defies comprehension, a spiraling slam amplified by gravitational force. Has he secured victory? The dust cleared gradually, revealing Michael atop Zardak's prone form, firmly locked in a perfect pin. The Crocman's massive chest rose and fell weakly, stunned into submission. The holographic referee appeared instantly, his hands striking the mat decisively. 1. The spectators roared collectively, their anticipation boiling over. 2. Michael tightened his hold instinctively, eyes fixed firmly upon his opponent. Zardak struggled feebly, but his strength had been thoroughly extinguished by Michael's masterful assault. As the referee's hand rose slowly for the decisive count, Michael felt an undeniable surge of triumph, not simply for the victory itself but for the validation it brought. This was the beginning of his legacy, a legend written in sweat, determination, and profound mastery. The arena fell into absolute silence, every being, virtual or real, transfixed, awaiting the referee's final, decisive word.